This is a compilation video of my top 10 gift ideas to sew for Christmas for 2025. So in this video, you're going to find the step-by-step tutorial for every single gift idea that I shared with you this year. So if you like watching really long videos, perhaps you like to pop a video on while you're sewing or while you're tidying up your room, or perhaps you just want to have a cup of tea and relax for a little while, this video is perfect for you. So let's start off with number one, and that's my pen holder bookmark. Let me show you how to make a fabric bookmark that also holds your pens as well. It's a really clever 2-in-1. Now this quick and easy sewing project is perfect for your journals, notebooks and diaries, and it's also a great gift. Let me show you how to make it with step-by-step instructions. So for the fabric bookmark, you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric that measure 8 inches by 3 inches. Then we're going to need a piece for our pocket, and that measures 10 inches by 3 inches. A piece of elastic at 13 inches, and this is 3/4 of an inch wide. It's quite wide elastic. Then we're going to need some fusible fleece. Now for the bookmark, these pieces are 7.5 inches by 2.5 inches. They're actually just 1/2 inch smaller than our bookmark size. And then we're going to need a little bit of fusible fleece for our pocket, and that measures 4.5 inches by 2.5 inches. I've taken now 2 pieces of fabric for our main part of the bookmark, and I've faced them right sides down, so the right side of the fabric is facing down. Then what I'm going to do is take my fusible fleece, and with the bumpy side, that's the side with the glue on it, I'm going to face that down onto the wrong side of the fabric, and I want to pop it in the center. So I've got about 1/4 of an inch around all the edges, and then when I'm happy that's in place, I'll just press, and we really want it to adhere to the fabric. And then I will just flip it over to the other side and give it a press on this side. Okay, and when we're happy that that's stuck to our fabric, I'll take our second piece and do exactly the same. So then I'm just going to set those 2 pieces aside. I'm going to take my pocket piece and I'm going to fold that in half so the wrong sides are facing each other. I'm going to line up the edges, especially this bottom edge here, give it a finger press, and then when I'm happy it's folded in half nicely, all the edges are lined up, I'm going to give that a press. Then I'm going to open it up. Take that smaller piece of fusible batting and place that on so I've got the edge lined up right where that fold is, and then it's about 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and then I'm going to press. I'm just going to flip it over to the back and press it on the back. Then what I'm going to do is close it up again where we had that original fold we did, and just give it a quick press. Now we're just going to sew a top stitch along this folded edge. I'm going to sew with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm using my left compensating foot, which is a special foot I can get from my Juki TL sewing machine. Use whatever guide you need to do exactly the same, and it doesn't have to be exactly 1/8 of an inch. We just want to do a nice top stitch which is decorative. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 3, and I'm using wonderful confetti thread. I'm going to start on the very edge and then come along to the other side. Cut my thread, and there we have it. So now with one of our main bookmark pieces, we're just going to turn that over so that the right side is facing us, and if you've got 2 pieces and one is nicer than the other, use your nicer piece now, because this is going to be the front of our bookmark. And if it's directional, make sure it's sitting in the direction you're happy with. Then we're going to take our pocket and pop that on top, and we're going to line it up on the bottom edge here and on the side edges. Then we're going to take our elastic, and I'm going to eyeball the center. If you don't want to eyeball the center, you could fold the pocket in half and finger press to get a mark for the center, but I'm just going to pop it where I think looks like the center, and that looks pretty good to me. And then when I'm happy, I'm going to pop a pin in. I want to pop the pin in through all the layers to keep it all together, and then we're going to do the same at the top. Now I'll just turn this around. We want to make sure that the elastic's not twisted, because what we're going to do is we're going to pin it here and then do a stay stitch. So we want to make sure it's not twisted like that, because then it's just not going to sit right on our book. So bring it out flat and then lift it up carefully and then find the center here again, and then pop a pin in. Now I'm just going to do a stay stitch at the top and the bottom of our elastic. So I have actually changed my foot for the next step, but don't worry about that. We just want to sew along this edge, and again, probably at about a 1/8 of an inch. We don't want to be able to see this when we turn our bookmark right sides out. It's just to keep it in place when we're sewing everything together. I'm not worrying about a back stitch. I'll cut my thread and do exactly the same on this side. Okay, now our elastic's secure. Let's do our next step. So now we've got our elastic attached. What I'm going to do is just fold it down so that it's not in the way. I'm just going to give it a finger press. I want it to sit just like that. Then we're going to take our second main fabric piece for our bookmark and place that right sides together so everything's inside there. We're going to line up all the edges, and then when we're happy, we're going to pop a few pins in to keep it all in place. I like to always start with the corners first. And do the sides. So now what we're going to do is mark our opening. Now we want it on the side here away from our pocket. So I'm going to start it right where our pocket ends, and then just about 1/2 inch down from that corner. So I can see that my pocket ends here. So I'm just going to mark right there. And then we're going to start at maybe say 1/2 inch down. We want to be able to still get a good corner, the integrity of the corner, but we want the opening as big as we can get it to get everything turned right sides out at that point. So now we're going to start here, go all the way around and stop here. So I've got my 1/4 inch foot on. To get my 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm stitching at stitch length 2 so it's nice and compact, and I'm going to start right where that mark is. Lower my foot, I'm going to go forward a few stitches, and then I will do a back stitch because I find when you turn things right sides out it tends to pull at those stitches, and that just makes it a little bit more secure. Now I'm going to go all the way around the edge till I get to that second marking. Removing the pins as I need to. When I come up to the corners, I'm just going to do my best guess at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure my needle's down, lift my foot up and turn, and then carry on. So just coming up to that second mark, I'm going to come right up to it, and then I'll do a back stitch again. Cut my thread. Now I'm just going to cut the excess fabric off all 4 corners, just being careful not to cut those stitches. Now I'm going to find my opening, and I'm going to grab the elastic and I'm going to pull it through, and we're going to turn it right sides out. And what I find the easiest way to do this is pull that elastic as far as I can, and then the bottom of our bookmark here, I'm just going to give that a push through too. Now it is a little bit fiddly. Oh, and then when we can see it pulling coming through, I just give that elastic another tug, and then we can see we've got our bookmark shape there. I'm going to take a point turner. You can use something similar, and I'm just going to make sure it's sitting all nicely, especially in those corners there. I'm being firm but not too firm, because you can push too hard and then accidentally go through your fabric. And then I'm just going to run it up and down those seams so they're sitting really nicely, and then let's give it a press. So I'm just going to find my opening and fold that in about a 1/4 inch because that was our seam allowance. And then I'm just going to make sure it looks like it's sitting really nicely, like the opening was never there, and when I'm happy I'll give that a press. And then I'll give the rest of the bookmark a press too. We want to make sure all these seams are rolled out nicely and sitting really nicely. And then we can just give it a press on the back too. Okay, now we're going to do a top stitch around the whole edge, which is decorative, but also closes up our opening. So just where that opening is, I will pop a pin in to make sure it's sitting all nicely for when we sew around the edge. And now it doesn't actually really matter where you start. I'm going to start on the bottom edge here, and I'm stitching at stitch length 3 because it's more decorative. And I'm using my left compensating foot again to get that 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, but just use whatever guide you'd like to. And now I'm just going to sew all the way around until I get back to where I started. Do keep an eye on your elastic here and make sure you're not sewing it into your bookmark, because it would be very easily to end up in a right royal pickle. So I'm just holding it out of the way as I sew around. And now I've come back past where I started. I will just do a back stitch and then cut my thread, and then I'll trim the loose threads there. So I've got this standard size exercise book here. I'm just going to pop my bookmark on it. Isn't that cute? So you're never going to forget your pens again. And then we can pop our pens in. And you can have a play with the size that you make your bookmark. I wouldn't go any longer personally, but definitely you could go wider or skinnier. And depending on the size of your notebook, you might want to have a play around with the length of your elastic. So I hope you like this tutorial. I think I'll be making a whole heap for Christmas this year as gifts, and maybe you should join me too, because they're so much fun and they're so quick to make. Now, to get the cutting instructions, I'll put a QR code above that you can scan, and I'll also put a link down in the description below. We're going to be making the most requested project that I've had from you all, and that's a Boxy zipper pouch. And I wanted to get it done now so you've got plenty of time for Christmas, because these little Boxy zipper pouches are going to make wonderful gifts for everyone you know. They're really easy to make. We're just going to go through step by step, and I'll show you exactly how. If you're new around here, my name's Stacey. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's make our Boxy zipper pouch. You can find a copy of these cutting instructions over on my website. I'll put a link down below. I also have a PDF pattern that you might like to purchase, and I'll put a link for that down below too. We're going to start off by making our tabs. Now, it's optional. You don't have to do tabs if you don't want to. This piece measures 4.5 inches by 2.5 inches. I'm just going to take it and fold it wrong sides together, press, then open it up, and then fold the edges into the fold, in towards the fold. Again, wrong sides together, and press. And again on this side. And then what we'll do is we'll fold that in half, and that creates our tab. Now what we're going to do is sew along both sides. So I'm going to stitch at stitch length 3. I'm using wonderful confetti thread, and I've got this neat little foot on here that doubles as a zipper foot and also a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance foot. So I'm going to use that. I've popped a pin in to keep all my layers together nicely. I'm just going to sew along both sides with that 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Use whatever guide you need to do to get that. I did use a pin just to keep it all nicely closed together before I sew. And I'll do the same along this side. So now we need 2 panels for our main fabric, and these measure 12 inches by 7 inches. And all I did was cut a larger piece that measured 16 inches by 14 inches, and I quilted them. Now, I didn't do the 3 layers, I just did the main fabric and my batting. And for my batting, I actually used by Annie's Soft and Stable, which gives us really nice shape. You could just use regular batting, or you could use fusible fleece, just whatever you prefer. I would like to use the Soft and Stable just because it gives you a really good structure for this project. So get your fabric, whatever batting you want, quilt that, and then we need to cut it to 2 pieces that measure 12 inches by 7 inches. Now we need to get our zipper, and I'm using this Stitch Supply Co zipper tape, and it's quite long. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut it so that it is just a bit longer than my panel here. So I want to make sure that that stopper is out of the way. I'll be cutting that off. And then we want to cut it off about here, so about 1/2 inch past the edge. We do want to make sure we have an actual zipper pull. We don't want to cut it off without our zipper pull. And then once I'm happy, I'll just trim that. Or of course you could just buy a zipper that is the right size. So you'd be needing one around probably about 14 inches, 14, 15 inches. Okay, so now because we have cut that, what I do like to do is just sew a couple of stitches to keep that shut so that we can make sure that it's sitting really nicely. So I will just really carefully sew along there. So I've lowered my stitch length down to 2, and I'm just going to take my time and sew right over the zipper, making sure that they're really nicely pushed together. Just like that. And all that's done is just going to help keep it closed for when we're sewing it all together. Then we need to take our quilted panel and make sure that it's right sides facing up, and then we're going to take our zipper and lay it on there right sides down. Something that can help with this step is By Annie's double-sided basting tape. It's become my best friend when it comes to making these zipper pouches. So I'll just take a piece of that and just pop it along the edge of my zipper. Take off the backing. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to line the edge of our zipper along the edge of our panel with the right side of the zipper facing down. And because it's taped, we can kind of just lift it up and check it. Okay, maybe we could fix it a little bit here. This can be a little bit fiddly. Now, if you don't have the tape, then just place it there when you're happy with how you've placed it. Then we're going to take our lining fabric and place that right sides down, and then again line it up along that edge. Now, you could use that tape again, but I find that it doesn't really matter at this point. It's more helpful with the zipper. And now we're just going to clip it in place. Now, if you didn't use By Annie tape, then you'd just be clipping it in place now. All the 3 layers, that is. So we want to make sure these edges are lined up nicely. All 4 edges are lined up nicely, and then we will clip that lining in place. Now, the lining is the same size as our quilted panel at 12 inches by 7 inches. I find clips are easier to use than pins, but just use whatever you like, and you can double check on this side that everything looks lined up nicely because we've got those 3 layers. And then once you're happy, we're going to sew. So with my zipper foot on, I'm going to stitch quite close to the zipper. I can feel it right here. Now your zipper foot might have a left and a right hand side. Just make sure you've got it positioned in the correct position. And again, I'm stitching at stitch length 2. And I'll remove the clips as they get in my way. Now I can feel the zipper pull under there is going to get in the way. So what I'm going to do is stop, make sure my needle's down, lift my foot up and just grab that zipper pull and pull it right back. And then I'll put everything back in place, put my foot back down and then carry on. Now we're going to press. So now we just want to push down, finger press down on our quilted panel and just give it a press so it's sitting really nicely. And we'll do the same on this side. We don't want any creases in there. And then when it's sitting nicely, we'll press. Okay, and now what we're going to do is a top stitch about 1/8 of an inch along this top seam here. So starting on the very edge, I've changed my stitch length to 3, and now I'm just going to stitch along that edge. And I'm using my zipper foot, which also does a really great 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. But just use whatever guide you need to use to get nice and close to the edge there. Coming right off the edge and cutting our thread. Let's carry on. So if you're using tape, we're just going to do the same on this side. Then we're going to take our second panel. Now, if you are using directional fabric, make sure you're placing it the right way up. And then all we're going to do is place our panel fabric right sides down on top of that, the edge of that zipper again. Also making sure that these edges here are lined up nicely. So okay, that's a bit wonky, so I'm just going to fix it up. Okay, that looks good to me. Then we're just going to flip it over and take our second piece of lining and place that right sides down. And again, line it up along these edges here and along that top edge. And then we're going to clip once we're happy all the edges are lined up nicely. And then we can just check at the top and then flip it over again and just check we're happy with everything. And then when we are, we're just going to sew along that edge just like we did the first time. I'm just going to lower my stitch back down to 2 and sew along again. I could feel my zipper pull in the way, so I pulled it down, but now I've come a little bit away from the edge. I'm just going to make sure my needle's down, lift that foot up and just move that zipper pull out of the way again. And then I'm just going to press again and then sew along the edge with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance like it was on this side. So I'm going to change my stitch length back up to 3 and then sew along this side with my top stitch. Now I'm going to cut the zipper excess off, and where I'd done my little stay stitches to keep my zipper closed, I was going to cut that off, so I just quickly did it again here so that it will keep those pieces together nicely when we're making our zipper pouch. So I'm just going to take my scissors and cut straight across there and then do the same on this side. Doesn't matter that we've cut off our little stopper, we don't need him. Now what we're going to do is take our little zipper tab and I'm going to fold that in half, finger press it in the center there, and then just cut it on that center. Probably didn't need to finger press it. And then what we're going to do is just simply fold them in half. If you've got a pattern, you could see that you're getting the pattern how you want it. I'd quite like a little star showing in mine, so I think that looks cute. And then I'm going to place it so the raw edges are along the raw edges right on top of our zipper there. And then I'm just going to clip that in place. And I'll do the same on this side. So I'm not going to get a little star on this one. That's okay. Now fold it in half, line up these edges with these edges and clip, making sure it's in the center of our zipper. And now I'm just going to stay stitch on both sides about 1/8 of an inch just to keep them in place when we're constructing our zipper pouch. Now what we're going to do is take our quilted panels and face them right sides together, and we're going to line up these edges on the top and the sides, and I will just pop a few clips in. And all we're going to do is sew along this edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to do the same on this side. We're going to line up the lining edges. And again, I'll pop some clips in. But on the lining side, we need to keep an opening. So if you want to, you could just do a little mark. It needs to be about 5 inches just so we can pull the whole box pouch back through itself. So about 5 inches. So we're going to start here, sew along and stop here, then start here and then carry on. So now I'm sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and my stitch length is 2. I'm just going to sew along the whole edge of our quilted panels. And when I come up to my mark that tells me to stop, I am just going to do a back stitch, because when we turn it right sides out, it does tend to pull those stitches. And then I'm going to carry on at my second mark, back stitch again. Now what we're going to do is open it up flat. Now this bit is a little bit fiddly. We want to line up the center seam basically right on top of our zipper. So once it's where it needs to be, let's give these seams a press open. And again, this is a little bit fiddly. I just think it helps it sit a little bit nicer when we're done. And then I'm going to flip it over and do the same on this side. So we're just getting that lining fabric to sit really nicely. So we've got the folded edges for the quilted panel and the lining folded here on both sides. And then that center seam, we want it to sit basically right on top of our zipper. And then I will press those seams open. Okay, so it can be a little bit fiddly, so just do your best. All right, I finally got it. There we go. So now we've got our lining folded and our quilted panel folded. What we're going to do is sew along each of these ends. So I will pop a few clips in. We want to make sure all those edges are lined up nicely, and we want to make sure that where the zipper is and that center seam is pretty much centered. And that lining fabric too. So just take a minute to get everything lined up nicely. And then pop some clips in. And then we'll do the other side as well. Making sure that center seam is lined up with the zipper and the lining is lined up with the zipper. And when I'm happy, I'll pop my clip in. Okay, we can check on this side. Can you see how I've got everything lined up nicely there? Now what we're going to do is just sew along both edges. We're not going to worry about a back stitch. We're still stitching at stitch length 2 and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now it's at this point it can be a bit bulky, so just go slow, especially if you decided to use the By Any Soft and Stable. If you use just regular batting, it won't be quite as bulky. Okay, coming off the edge there and doing the same on the other side. Okay, let's do our boxy corners. So now on all 4 corners, we need to measure 1 1/4 inches. So I'm just going to take my ruler, find my 1 1/4 inches and place those markings on the edge of my pouch here. So that's 1 1/4 on this side, right on the edge. That's 1 1/4 this side, right on the fold. And then I'm just going to mark that. And then I'm going to repeat that for all 4 corners. And I'm just using a washable marker. We're not going to see this, so whatever you've got on hand is fine. Okay, and now what we're going to do is cut those corners out. So we're going to cut through all the layers and cut our corners out on all 4 sides. So now what we're going to do on all 4 corners is where we've cut it, we want to open that up and then create a nice straight line just like that. And then when we're happy, I'm just going to pop a clip in just there in the center to hold that in place. And then we want to do the same for the lining. So you might need to maneuver the layers a bit to make it easier for yourself. And I'm just going to open the lining up and do exactly the same. It is a little bit fiddly, so just take your time. Okay, that looks great. So I'm just going to move the pin, or the clip rather, so it's holding both the layers, the quilted panel and the lining. Can you see how I've done that? Now, if you want to, you could even clip these sides down just to make sure they're not getting all twisted in there, and so you don't end up in a right royal pickle. And then all we're going to do is sew along this edge, closing off our quilted panel and our lining in one go. So starting on the very edge, stitching at stitch length 2 with my 1/4 inch seam allowance, I will do a back stitch. And then when I come up to this end, I will also do a back stitch. And now I'll repeat that for all 4 corners. So now we've got what looks like a bit of a mess, but I've sewn all 4 corners down and we need to turn it right sides out. So I did forget to say to make sure that zip is left a little bit open. But what I'm going to do now is yank it right open and then turn it right sides out. And this never looks great. And then I'm going to push all the lining in. And what we can do is grab a point turner. And then with my point turner, just get all those points, all those corners looking really good. Okay, so that is looking super cute. So now what we need to do is just sew that lining close. So I'm just going to pull it back out and then line up those edges. We did press them, so they're going to sit really nicely and line up really nicely. So I'm just going to sew really close to the edge, closing up that opening. So I did just pop a pin in to keep all the edges lined up nicely. Just going to sew right on that edge there. I will do a back stitch. And our opening was quite big, so let's make sure we close it up properly. I'll do a back stitch and then we can trim any loose threads, and then let's take a look at our little pouch. So there's our little zipper pouch. Isn't that just absolutely adorable? This end there, I think that's looking fantastic. Now what you can do is you can actually fold along these edges here and just give them a light press if you'd like to get it to really sit in a really boxy shape. I actually like to do that with mine, and you might also just want to give these a little press, roll them out so everything's just sitting really nicely. But there we have our little boxy zipper pouch. What do you think? Isn't that just absolutely adorable? I hope you liked this tutorial. Now I think that'd make a fantastic Christmas gift for absolutely everyone, especially if you use fabric that you know the recipient would love. And if you're wondering about the cute fabric I used, it's called Egg and Friends by Kimberly Kite for Ruby Star Society. Today we're sewing the cutest fall project. It's a big apple coaster. It's a quick and easy project, and I've got a free template if you'd like to sew along with me. You know I love all my fall projects, so let's make a big apple coaster. You can find a copy of these cutting instructions over on my website. I'll put a link down below. I also have a PDF pattern that you might like to purchase, and I'll put a link for that down below too. So the fabric that I'd like to be the front of my apple coaster, I'm going to pop that on top of our piece of batting, and that was, and these 2 pieces measured 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. Then I'm just going to quilt it. Quilt yours however you like, but I'm just going to do lines. Just going to draw them on. So I'm just going to quilt that, and then I will quilt it the other way. Quilt yours however you like, and I'll be right back. Next up, let's cut out our apple template. Now I've got a free copy of this over on my website, and I'll put a link down in the description below for you if you'd like to get a copy. Or of course, you could always just draw your apple shape, your stalk and your leaf if you're confident doing that. But a lot of people do find the free printables really helpful. So whatever you're going to do, get your template ready, cut it out, and I've already pre-cut mine. Now we're going to take our quilted piece of fabric and make sure it's facing the right way. So if it's directional fabric, make sure it's sitting the way you'd like it to sit. Then we're going to take our backing fabric, and the same goes for that if it's directional. Line up the edges, and we've placed them right sides together. Then I'm going to take my coaster shape and pop that on top. Now there's two ways of doing this. We could either pin the template to our fabric here and then take our scissors and just cut straight around the template, or we can draw around our template with say a washable marker, and then we just cut around our drawn line. So I'm just going to do it like that this time. Honestly, I just do it however it tickles my fancy at the time. There's no right or wrong way. It's just whatever you find the easiest. Okay, so I will just pop some pins in to keep it in place, because remember we've got our two layers together there, and I don't want it to move around when I'm cutting it out. And I'm just putting the pins like this because I don't want them to get in the way of the scissors. And one thing I did forget to do was just mark those little dots, which are just going to be my opening. Now, if you're going to remember to leave an opening, then you don't need to worry about that, but that's just a nice visual clue that we're going to start here, go all the way around, and then finish here when we're sewing. So just making sure I'm cutting through all the layers, and I'm just going to cut along my drawn line. It doesn't have to be perfect because this is just a craft project. Okay, now what we're going to do is just sew along our edge, starting, like I said earlier, at that first dot, going all the way around, and then stopping at our second dot. So I'm stitching at stitch length 2. I've got my 1/4 inch foot on to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm using wonderful confetti thread. I'm going to go forward a few stitches and then do a back stitch. And I just like to do that because when we turn it right sides out, it does tend to pull at those stitches, and that just helps them stay secure. And then I'm just going to carefully sew around the shape of my apple. And I find if you go nice and slowly, you'll get a really nice shape. I'm coming up to that second mark, and I will just do another back stitch, cutting my thread, and now I'll remove my pins. Now, if you'd like to, you can trim the corners. I find it doesn't really make too much of a difference with this project, but if you'd like to, you could just trim the corners, especially on the curves. Now what I'm going to do is find our opening, pop my fingers in and grab the very bottom of the apple, grab it with my 2 fingers and pull it through. And then we're pushing it all through. Then I'm going to get my point turner, and I just like to pop that in and just make sure everything's sitting really nicely. And this is my special one from Modern American Vintage that I love. So particularly on those bottom seams, I just like to run it along them so that the seams are all sitting really nicely. And do it all the way up here, and then what we're going to do is just give that a quick press so we've got our nice apple shape. So the first thing we're going to do is find our opening, and we want to fold that in about 1/4 inch because that was our seam allowance, and we did have that little divot-y shape. Is divot the right word? I'm not sure, but okay, I can see we're still getting it. And I know you might be thinking that that was a weird place to leave the opening, because we would normally leave the opening on the side here, but it's just because we're going to put our stalk in here, and then we're also going to put our leaf on here, so we're not going to see too much of this anyway. So once you're happy that it's sitting nicely, we're just going to give that a quick press to keep it in place, and then I'll give the whole thing a press. I already rolled out all those seams. You can double check them again, making sure they're nicely rolled out. Pressing, and I'll give it a press on the back too. Isn't that fabric really pretty? It's perfect for fall. Okay, now let's set our apple aside and work on our stalk. So then let's take our stalk template, and all I did was take a bit of scrap fabric. I did fold it in half, and then I placed my fold on the edge of the template, and then I just cut it out. It doesn't matter if it's on the fold because we are actually going to sew along that fold anyway, so 2 separate pieces is also fine. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to start on the opening edge, sew along the fold and back down, leaving an opening at the bottom. All the settings are the same. Just sewing along, turning it roughly a 1/4 inch there. Oh, 1 stitch too short. Coming off the edge. Now let's turn that into our little stalk. Now we are going to cut the excess fabric off the corners, being careful not to cut our stitches. Well, if you'd like to, you could just trim those threads too. Looking a bit messy. Now what we're going to do, and this is a little bit fiddly, is we're going to open it up, and then we're going to push the top down and then grab it with our fingers. And it is little, so it is fiddly. But you will get there in the end. And then I'm just going to take my point turner and give that a bit of a hand. Now, if you don't have a point turner, you could use something like a chopstick, just something with a blunt end. We don't want to accidentally go through our fabric, which is very easily done. Now I'm just going to give that a quick press, and we'll attach it to our pumpkin. So now we're going to take our little stalk, and you can check that you're using the side that you'd like to be the front, and I'm happy with that side. And then we're going to pop it in our opening. Now we want it to be around about in the middle. It doesn't have to be perfect, just eyeball it. And then we do want it to be really tucked in there. So mine is probably in about 1/2 inch, but you could pop yours in more if you'd like your stalk shorter, or a little bit more out if you'd like it a bit longer. Just whatever you'd like. I'm also going to make sure it looks sort of nice and straight. But again, you could put yours on the side. And then I will just pop a pin in just to keep that in place. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew around the whole edge just as our top stitch, which is decorative, but it also does close our opening off and keep our stalk in place. So I did turn my pin around so it doesn't get in the way of when I first start sewing. Now we need to sew with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to actually turn my stitch length up to 3, which is what I like when it's more decorative. And I'm using my left compensating foot, which is a really nice foot that comes with the Juki TL sewing machines. But if you don't have one, just use whatever foot you've got that gives you the best result. So I'll just pop my foot down and sew around that edge. And I'm just going to take my time. I'm just going to hold that thread so it doesn't get all caught up in my stitches and create a bird's nest. Coming right past where I started, and I will do a back stitch. Cutting my thread, and then I will just trim my loose threads, and then let's move on to making our leaf. So now I've got my leaf template, my 2 pieces of fabric for my leaf. Then I'm just going to take a little piece of interfacing, and I'm going to place that with the bumpy side or the glue side down on the wrong side of one of my leaf pieces. And this was just a scrap piece. I didn't cut it any particular size. It was already that thin size. It's just to give our leaf a little bit more stability. So if you've got a bigger piece, that will also be fine. And I'm just going to quickly give that a press. So now I'm going to take our two pieces and place them right sides together. I'm going to take my leaf and pop it on top. And then I'm just going to pin it, and I am going to cut around it with my scissors because I just think it is easier with the smaller shape than drawing around it and then cutting it out. So just carefully cutting both the layers. I'm just going to remove the pin, remove the template, and then pop the pin back in, making sure the layers stay together nicely. And now what I'm going to do is sew around the edge, and again we do need to leave an opening. So I'll just mark it. If you're going to remember to leave an opening, don't worry about marking it, but that's just to remind me to start there and stop here. I've turned my stitch down to 2. I've already gone forward a few stitches, so I will just do a back stitch again, and then I'm just going to go around my shape carefully. Coming back to where we started and doing a back stitch, and I do have my 1/4 inch foot on again, forgot to say that. So now let's remove our pin, trim that thread. I'm just going to trim the excess again on both the corners or the points of the leaf. And if you want to, you could trim a little bit of the excess here on this side. Then we're going to turn it right sides out, again finding our opening, grabbing the edge and pulling that through. Getting my point turner and just making sure that's all sitting really nicely. Okay, let's give our little leaf a quick press. So just finding our opening again and folding that in about 1/4 inch so it's sitting nicely and we've got our nice leaf shape. Can be a little bit fiddly, so just take your time. And then when you're happy, let's give that a press. I'm going to give it a press on both sides. Remember to just check that all those seams are rolled out nicely. My leaf shape doesn't look so nice on this side, so I'm just going to readjust it and repress. Now we're going to draw our lines for our leaf. So with the washable marker, I'm just going to draw some lines to sew along for our veins. Now it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to start at the bottom here and go up, and I like to do it a little bit off center, and then I'll just do 2 lines coming off it, just like that. And if you want to, you could just do that by eye as you were sewing it. I find it just helps me to have some guides to sew along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the very edge here, and I'm going to sew along with my 1/8 inch seam allowance, doing my top stitch and closing off my opening. Then when I get down to the bottom, I'm going to go all the way up to the top, come down to this join here of the veins, go up that side, back down, up that side, back down, down, up, and then all the way back down again. But do whatever you like, and if you want to, you could just skip this altogether and just do a top stitch. It's entirely up to you. So I'm going to put my stitch length back up to 3, and I'm just using my regular foot, not my left compensating foot, because I need to do the edge and then come up through the center. So I'm just going to eyeball my 1/8 inch seam allowance. And yes, I am just using my brown thread. I figure it's a fall project, so it's just like the leaves are slowly changing color on my apples. Okay, so I'm right down to where I started. Now I'm just going to sew along those drawn lines. Just coming down to the bottom and doing a back stitch, cutting my thread and then just trimming my loose threads, and I'll just give that a quick press before we sew that onto our apple. So now we're just going to work out where we'd like to sew our leaf on. I like to place it here sort of coming over to the side, and then that way I can actually sew along this main vein line, and I know I'm going to be catching the coaster. We could pop it up a little bit. It's really just a personal preference. I usually like to start the point of the leaf sort of around about in the middle, but again, it's really just a personal preference. So work out where you'd like your leaf to sit, and then I will just pop a pin in just to keep that in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew along the vein, and then I'll stop where I know that I will no longer be sewing the two pieces together. So I'm starting at the very bottom of my leaf, and I will do a back stitch. And then I'm just going to follow along that vein. Like I said, sorry, I feel like I'm being a bit repetitive. You can remove your pin if it's getting in the way. Okay, I can feel that that's the end of my coaster, so I will just do a back stitch and cut my thread. Now, I said that you didn't have to draw that vein and sew those lines if you didn't want to. If you didn't do that, you could have always just sewn along your top stitch there to hold it in place. So I'll just trim my threads, and then let's take a look at our little coaster. Now there's our little coaster. Isn't that absolutely adorable? I just love how it looks. Now that is loose there, but it is definitely secure. And if I flip it over onto the back, that's what the back looks like. You can see my stitching there, but I think that's fine. If you wanted to, you could also sew a button on here over the top, but I personally just like it like that. I think it looks absolutely adorable. I hope you like this tutorial. These big apple coasters are such a fun way to bring fall into your home, and they make the sweetest teacher gifts too. Don't forget to grab your free template. I'll put a link down below. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a super handy quilted glasses case. Now, I think you'll find you'll love to make one for yourself and to make them as gifts. Let me show you how to make one. So to start off with, we're going to need some quilted fabric. Now first, let's just talk about this cute fabric I'm using, which is brand new fabric by Sarah Hart's called Joyful June with Vigo Fabrics. Isn't it just delightful? Now what I'm going to do is I've started with two pieces of fabric that measure 8 inches by 9 inches, one for the main fabric and one for the lining, and then we're also going to need a piece of batting. And then what I'm going to do is just sandwich those fabrics. So I'll take my lining, place that right sides down, pop my batting on top, smooth it out, and then pop my main fabric on top and then smooth that out. Then what I'm going to do is just quilt that. I'm just going to check it's nicely smoothed out on the back too. And a new favorite way for me to quilt is to take my ruler and draw a line to get started. But what I'm using today is this says it on the lid. It's an air erasing sew line pen. So what happens is this is just going to erase over time. Actually, I say over time, but it erases really, really quickly. And I'm just loving it. So I'm using my regular sewing machine today, and I'm just using this pen, and then I've been ruling all my lines. So I'll just decide how I want to quilt this. So I'm just going to do lines and then do lines this way to get a grid. Quilt yours however you like, and then I'll see you back here. So I said I was using my regular sewing machine. What I meant was I'm using my regular foot rather than changing it over to my walking foot. And today I'm using the Juki DX7, which was kindly loaned to me by Juki Junkies. And they're my favorite, or actually my only recommended dealer that I would use if you needed to buy a Juki. I'll put their details down in the description below if you'd like to check them out if you're looking for a new sewing machine. I have to say that I was talking to David at Juki Junkies, and he was like, how are you finding the DX7? And I was like, to be honest, I haven't used it much. So I'm trying to use it a bit more, and I'm really loving it, particularly this foot that I'm using. And I'll show you how handy it is when we attach our binding. So now I've finished quilting. I've cut the piece to the size I need, which is 7 inches high and 7.5 inches wide. Then what we're going to do is we need to find the center, which measures 3 inches and a quarter. And I'm just going to mark that. We could have just folded it in half and found that center mark. And then I just want to measure on the right hand side, on the side edge here, 1 inch down. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler, and if you'd like to, you can draw a line to make sure it's nice and straight, but I'm just going to cut. I'm lining up the ruler right on that top dot that I did in the center and on this bottom dot that's 1 inch down, and then I'm just going to cut. The next step is to turn it over so we've got the lining side facing you, and we're going to take our binding. Now this binding measures 22 inches long, and then it was 2 inches and a quarter wide, and then I folded it in half and gave it a press. So now what I want to do is I just want to place it along this whole edge here, and we're going to follow the shape, and I'm just going to cut it off so we've just going past the sides. About 1/4 inch to 1 inch is plenty. So I'll just put that excess aside. We're going to use that. Now what I'm going to do is just line up those edges with the binding and clip. So we've got the raw edges of the binding lined up against the raw edges of our top of our glasses case on the edge that we cut that angle on. Now it is on an angle, so I'm just going to follow along. It's not a bigger enough of an angle to worry that you're not going to be able to sew that nicely. And now what we're going to do is just sew that down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I'm starting off the very edge and I'm stitching with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm just going to sew along the whole edge here. I'm not going to worry about a back stitch. And I'm stitching at stitch length 2. And I'm just doing the best I can to follow that curve that we cut. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just give that a press so that the binding is pushed away from the quilted fabric. Now, just like regular binding, we're just going to fold that over and clip that down. Again, following the curve, and because it was such a small curve, it's really not going to cause us any issues at all. Okay, now we're going to sew. So now I'm just going to start on the very edge. I'm stitching at stitch length 3, and I'm sewing with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And this is why I love this foot so much, is I don't know if you can see it, but I've got lots of different guides I can follow. It's just a really neat foot that I've never used before. So I'm loving the DX7 and the standard 1/4 inch foot that it comes with, because like I said, there's other guides. So I'm just going to go all the way along the edge, removing my clips as I need to. And then coming off the edge, cutting my thread, and then we're just going to cut this excess binding off. So to cut the excess off, I'm just going to take my ruler, line it up on that edge, and then cut it off so we know it's nice and perfect. And I'll do that on both sides. Okay. Then we're going to take our glasses case, have the lining facing us, and fold it in half so that these raw edges line up really nicely. Then we're going to flip it over to the back, and we're going to work on the shorter edge or the bottom first. We're going to take our binding and we're going to line up the raw edges of our binding on the raw edges of our case, making sure everything's staying in place. And if you'd like to, you could just even pop a clip in here on the side just to keep it in place while we're trying to clip our binding in place. Then I'm going to place it on there, but I want to make sure I've got an excess of about 1/2 inch, at least 1/2 inch on that first side there where we've got our fold. Then I'm going to clip it into place. Now, just like regular binding, we need to do mitered corners. So if you're familiar with binding, and you'll remember that we need to stop at about 1/4 inch before the edge and pivot off towards the corner of our case here, by all means do that. But if you're new or you might forget, what we can do is just mark it. So I'm going to find the edge of my case, move in about 1/4 inch. I'm just doing it by eye, and then I'm just going to draw a dot on my binding so I know where I'm stopping and then pivoting in, and that will make more sense when we get to the sewing bit. Okay, now we're just going to sew along this edge here first. So I'm starting right on that folded edge. I'm going to come forward a few stitches and then I will do a back stitch so it's nice and secure. I'm going to move this clip out of the way because it is kind of in my way. That was the clip we just put there to hold it all in place while we were clipping the binding on. I'm stitching at stitch length 2 and I'm again using my 1/4 inch seam allowance, removing the clips as I need to. Then when I'm getting to my mark and I can't see it, I could lift my foot up just to check and I can see the dot just right there. Then I know I'm 1/4 inch away from the edge of my case. I'm just going to stop and we're just going to turn our piece or our case and we're going to come off the edge there towards the corner. And that gives us a really nice mitered corner. I'll cut my thread and then I'll show you exactly what I mean. Can you see what we did there? We sewed along and then we got a 1/4 inch away from the edge. We stopped and pivoted and we sewed down towards the corner of our case. So now I'm just going to clip it closed with those edges all lined up nicely just while I'm working on this mitered corner here. So for the mitered corners, what we do is we take our binding and we fold it up, creating a nice straight line with the edge of our case and the edge of our raw edge binding there. Then we're going to bring it down, but we want to fold it here on the top edge of our case. So we're just going to bring that down. And that is how we do our mitered corners. So now we have a fold here. We also have this binding, all the raw edges lined up really nicely along here. Oops, and then when we're happy, we're just going to clip that in place. Just like that. Now what I'll do is I'll clip the rest of my binding and all my edges, making sure all the edges are lined up nicely. And then I'll just carry on until I get to the end of the case. Okay, if I flip it over to the front here, oh, that was all twisted, lucky I checked that. You'll see that when I'm sewing the binding on, I'm going to come past here, lose part of the case where we cut the side off, and then I'll just be carrying on. So I'm starting on the edge, I'm going to do a few stitches forward, and then I will do a back stitch, just so it's nice and secure. Then I'm going to sew all the way till the end. Now I'm coming right up to my edge. When I'm at the edge, I will do a back stitch again, and then I'm going to cut my thread. Okay, we're nearly finished. So first thing I'm going to do is just cut off this excess binding here. We do need excess, but not quite that much. I want it to be about 1/2 inch past the edge of my case here, and it doesn't have to be perfect. If anything, more than 1/2 inch, not less than 1/2 inch. So now what we're going to do is we're going to finish off our binding. And this is a really fun technique if you've never done this before. Now, I actually remembered I've forgotten a step. I think it's best to just give this a quick press, just so that it's sitting really nicely and helps us fold it over and clip it a little bit easier. So I'm just going to press my binding away from the quilted fabric and I'll be right back. So there we go. I did give it a quick press. I do think it helps. Now what we're going to do with this excess binding is simply fold it over that raw edge there, and then we're going to fold the binding over just like we normally did, and we get a really beautiful tidy finish. So when you're happy with how that's looking, pop a clip in. Then we're just going to carry on and clip the rest of the binding in place just like we normally would. Then when we come to our corner, it almost wants to sit perfectly. So we're just going to fold that just as we have been. And then on this corner, we're just bringing this edge over. Now, if I do it like that, you can see it looks really messy. So this little bit of excess here, we want to push that down and in and then fold it over to get a nice straight line. So have a little bit of a play with that until you're happy with how it's sitting. And then I'm going to put a clip right on top of it, keeping it in place. And then I'm coming back up to a raw edge. So Do you remember what we did? All we did was fold that over, closing this all up. I've got a bit of a bird's nest there, so I might just quickly trim that. It's easier to do it now. So we're just going to fold that over and then fold this binding over. Now that looks a bit messy. I can see it popping out here. So I'm going to just try again, and then I'll just keep trying until I'm happy with how it's sitting and that it looks really tidy. And what I can do is I can just try tucking that edge in under there, and I think that looks a whole lot nicer. So once I'm happy, I'll just pop a clip in there too. I'll pop another clip here, and then all I'm going to do is sew my binding down and we've finished our case. So something you might find helpful when you're doing fiddly things like this is using a stiletto, and this one's by Clover. So I'm just going to start on the very edge there. I'm stitching at stitch length 3. I'm going to go forward a couple of stitches, then I will do a back stitch, and then I'll carry on. And I'm stitching with my 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just like we did the binding the first time around on this top edge. Removing the clips as I need to. Now it can get a bit tricky when we come up to the mitered corner. I'm just going to remove that clip, make sure I'm still happy with how everything's sitting, and then just go really nice and slow. And then I'm just going to, when I get to that corner, I'm just going to turn. And this is when a stiletto can come in handy, because I'm just going to hold that in place and then sew, and making sure I catch it. Coming right up to the very edge and then doing a back stitch. And cutting our thread. Now I'll just trim my loose threads. So then we have our little glasses case. Isn't that just so cute? And then we can open it up and see our little pouch. Pop my glasses in, and that's just perfect for reading size glasses or smaller size sunglasses. You can make this any size you like, just have a play with the measurements. If anything, I would have changed the color of my thread for this top stitch. It probably would have looked a little bit nicer in matching fabric so it didn't stand out so much. But there you go, there's our cute little glasses case. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Now, once you've made your quilted fabric, it's so quick to actually make the case itself. The binding can be a little bit tricky, but that just takes a bit of practice. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a snap pouch. Now, this is my 2.0 version. I've made this tutorial before, but this time we're adding a little D-ring to the side, which just makes it look a little bit fancier. Plus, you could clip it onto something or maybe clip a charm onto it. I think these are really great little gift ideas, and I think once you make one, you'll want to make a whole heap more because they're just so quick and easy to make. If you're new here, my name's Stacey. Thanks so much for joining me. Let me show you how to make a snap pouch. To make this project, you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric that measure 5 inches by 8 inches. I'm using both of the same fabrics, but you could always use a different fabric for the lining. Then we need another piece of fabric that measures 2 inches by 2 inches. A piece of interfacing that's actually 1/2 inch smaller than our fabric. So that's 4.5 inches by 7.5 inches. And then we have a 1/2 inch D-ring. You can find a copy of all the supplies required over on my website. I'll put a link down in the description below. Plus you'll need a snap set. I forgot to put it here, but we will need 1 snap set. For my interfacing, I'm using Heat and Bond soft woven fusible. Just use whatever you've got on hand, and depending on the thickness of your interfacing will just make your snap pouch be more structured. So what I'm going to do is, it's got a bumpy side. I'm going to place that down on the wrong side of my fabric in the center. Now we did cut it 1/2 inch smaller than our fabric, so you'll see I can see the fabric popping out. I just want to make sure it's in the center, so I've got about 1/4 inch of the fabric I can see underneath the interfacing there. Once I'm happy that it's centered, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. I'm just going to press it, which melts that glue. And I will just turn it over and give it a press on this side too. We want it to be adhered really well because it just makes it easier when we're turning it right sides out, and it just sits a whole heap nicer. Okay, let's move on to the next step. So now what we're going to do is measure the center of our top. So I'm just going to take my ruler. Now our piece measured 5 inches, so the center is going to be 2.5 inches. So I'm just going to put a little dot right there at the very top center. And then on each side, I'm just going to measure 1 inch down and just do a little dot right on the edge there. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line from our 1 inch down mark to our center and then down to the other side. Then what I'm going to do is on the right hand side, I'm just going to measure 5 inches up from the bottom. So just finding the 5 inch mark on my ruler, lining it up on the bottom there, and just measuring 5 inches here on the side. Now that we've done all our measurements, we're going to do our D-ring strap. Now, if you don't want to do a D-ring, it's completely optional. You can just skip this part. So with our 2 inch by 2 inch piece, we're going to fold it in half, right, wrong sides that is, together and press. Then we're going to open it up, and the raw edges, we're going to fold them into the fold that we just pressed. And I'll give that a press, and I'll do the same on this side. So both our raw edges are meeting up in the middle. Then I'm going to fold it back in half again and give it another press. Now we're just going to stitch down each side of our strap. So it's so little, I'm not going to worry about pins. I'm going to sew with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm using my left compensating foot, which gives me a really nice finish. But just use whatever guide you need to get that seam allowance. And I'm just going to start on the side that we're closing, and I'm going to stitch at stitch length 3, and I'm using wonderful confetti thread. Coming off the very edge, cutting my thread, and I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. This is just decorative really, and I think it looks nicer when it's been sewn on both sides. I'm going to pop my D-ring on, fold it in half. You could check that you're happy with the fabric that it's showing. I think it will look nice with that side. I could open it up and check that if that side would be better, but I'm happy with this side. Then I'm just going to fold it back in half, line up these edges here, and then sew along this edge just to keep it all together. I'm not going to worry about changing my foot because it's just really to hold them together nicely when we sew our pouch together. Okay, I'm going to cut my thread, and then I'm just going to trim off all these loose threads just to keep it tidy. So for our strap, I just want to measure a 1/4 inch line to help us line it up nicely. So I'm just going to take my ruler, find the 1/4 inch mark, and roll a nice straight line along the edge there. That's going to help us with our next step. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my 2 pieces of fabric right sides together, make sure all my edges are lined up nicely, and then I'm just going to pin it in place. But when I put my pins in here, I'm going to make sure they're not in the way of those blue lines, because we're going to trim that excess. Actually, I'm just going to put them in on the side there like that. Then what we're going to do is, now that the pieces are pinned together nicely, we're just going to trim along the lines that we drew earlier. So just taking my scissors and carefully cutting, making sure we cut both those layers. Okay, now what we're going to do is take our D-ring piece, and we've got our little line there, and we've got our little dot that we drew earlier. We're just going to pop it in between the 2 layers, and we're going to line it up so the dot is in the center of the strap, and the line that we drew is lined up with the edge of our fabric. And that way we know it's nice and straight, and it's exactly where we want it to be. And because it's a little bit chunky, I find it easier just to use a clip to hold that in place. Oopsie, it moved. So just lining it back up again and clipping. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sew around the edge, but we need to leave an opening. Now if you're going to remember to leave an opening, by all means just sew. But if you think you might forget, we can just draw one on the side here. I'm going to do it, say 1.5 inches away from that edge, and then do another marking here. It's about 2.5 inches, I guess. So we'll start here, sew around and stop here, and I've just done it away from the side with our little D-ring on it. So you can't see it, but I've got my foot sitting right on top of that first little marking we did. I'm going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I've lowered my stitch down to a 2.5. So I'm going to go forward a few stitches, and then I will do a back stitch because I find that when you turn it right sides out, it tends to pull at those stitches. So now I'm just going to sew along the edge. Coming up to the corner, I'm just going to do my best guess at a 1/4 inch away from that edge there. Make sure my needle's down and turn, and repeat that until I get back down to my marking, the second marking that is. Just removing that clip and holding it in place, and we can just stop and pause and make sure we're happy with how it's sitting before we sew over it. So just make sure you're happy. I'm just going to sew right over the top, and then I'm just going to do a back stitch back over it, and now I'm just going to carry on, and that's just going to make it extra secure. Coming up to that second marking, just sewing right up to it. Doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be exact. Doing a back stitch again and cutting my thread. Now on all the corners, I'm just going to trim the excess off, being careful not to cut the stitches. I'll just cut the top off that top corner piece there. And the little bit of excess there that's sticking out from our strap, I just leave it there. It doesn't cause any problems, but I guess if you'd like to, you could trim that. Now what we're going to do is turn it right sides out. So I'm just going to find the opening, and I put my fingers in and grab a corner and then pull it through the opening. We want to get it sitting the best we can. And then I'm going to use my point turner, or you could use a chopstick or something similar. And we just want to get it sitting really nicely. And I'm just going to run the point turner along all the edges. I do find that just helps to get it sitting nicely. And then what I'm going to do is give that a press. So the first thing we're going to do is find our opening. And what we want to do is make sure that this edge here is folded in about 1/4 inch, because that was our seam allowance. And then we want to press. We want it to look like that opening was never there. Then what I'm going to do is just check all the edges and make sure they're rolled out. We want it to just be sitting really nicely, and then when we're happy, we'll press. It's helped that I use that point turner to run along the edge. It's all looking pretty good to me, so I'll just press. Checking our top point. That looks great too. Okay, I'm just going to give it a once over, because if you watch my videos, you'll know I love pressing. Okay, let's move on to the next step. So now with our lining side facing us and our D-ring to the left-hand side, it doesn't really matter what side the D-ring's on, that's just my preference. We're going to take this bottom edge and fold it up, and we want to fold it up about 2.5 inches. So I'm going to take my ruler, place the edge of that bottom there, well, the edge, it's the bottom that we folded up. I'm going to place that on the edge of my ruler. Find 2.5 inches on the ruler and make sure it is folded up 2.5 inches. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but that looks great to me. Then what we're going to do is just clip it in place, or you could use pins. I just find clips easier. And now what we're going to do is we're going to sew along the bottom edge around the top and then back down to the bottom edge. And we're not going to worry about sewing it along this folded bottom edge here. So now we're going to sew with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, use whatever foot you need to do that. I'm using my left compensating foot, and I've put my stitch length back up to 3. So I'm just going to start on the very edge. I'm going to go forward a few stitches, and then I will do a back stitch down to the bottom edge, and then I'm going to carry on around, removing my clips as I need to. just going nice and slow because we don't need to rush, and then that way I'm going to get a really nice finish. Coming right down to that bottom fold, then again I'm going to do a back stitch, cut my thread, and now I'm just going to trim those loose threads there and tidy it up a little bit. So we're just going to fold down our top here and press it so it's sitting nicely. But when we fold it down, I personally don't like to fold it right down on the top edge of our pocket. I like to leave about 1/4 of an inch, and I just do it by eye. I don't measure it or anything. I make sure that both sides are lined up nicely, and that looks about right. And then I will just give it a press. And I'll press it on this side as well. So now we're going to do our snaps. Now what you need is snaps, the pliers and the awl, and this comes in a set for around $20, and you'll also get a whole lot of spare snaps in lots of different colors, and it's a great investment. I'll put a link down below if you'd like to get one. I think you'll find you love making these little snap pouches, and there's other projects you can make with them too. I'll put links down below with any projects that I have used snaps. Now what we're going to do is measure where we would like our snap to be. Now we've got a little pointy bit there, and I'm going to press it down, marking where I want it to be. And I want it to be just above the stitches and in the center. And I find if I just try to do that by eye, it doesn't go so well. So I'm just going to measure the middle, and it should measure 4.5 inches, and then half of that is 2.25 inches. So I'm just going to find 2.25 inches on my ruler, make sure I'm in the middle there, find that point, make sure it's lined up approximately in the middle with the ruler, and also where I want it to be in relation to the stitches on my pouch here. So that looks pretty good. I'm just pressing it down, so it's going to create an indent. Can you see that? It's like almost created a little hole, and that's where I'm going to use my awl to go through. So I'm just going to take my awl and pop it through that hole, coming out the other side and being careful not to accidentally stab myself. Okay, so we've come right through the other side. Then what I'm going to do is take my cap, or the top of my snap, and pop it in through the top. Then I'm going to take my socket piece and place that on top, so it's sitting there nicely. Then I'm going to take my pliers, and I'm just going to place those right on top and give it a real good squeeze. Now you're going to kind of expect it to click or something, but it doesn't, because it's just plastic. It kind of just mushes in there. And now if I try to pull it off, I can't, because it's nice and secure. Now what I'm going to do is just fold it back down, and I'm just going to press really firmly again to make a marking where I'll put my second snap. So just pressing down, and then can you see I've got a little indent there showing me where I need to put my second snap. So what I'm going to do is again take my awl, pop it through and push it all the way through the layers, but I want to make sure I don't actually come through onto the other side. We just want to pop it through this first part of the pocket. So just going through carefully, and you can see I've done it there. So removing the awl, then I'm going to take my snap, but this time I'm going to come in through the back. This can be a little bit fiddly, and just push it through. We want to push it all the way down. We want to really see that pointy piece coming through. Then I'm going to take my stud and pop it on top. Then I'm just going to take my pliers again, put it right on top of that snap and press firmly. And do give it a really good firm press. And there we have it. If I pull at it, it's really nice and secure. And then if I push down, whoop, we have our snap. And then putting it back down again. There we go. We've got our little snap pouch. Isn't that just adorable? So I hope you enjoyed my new version of my snap pouch tutorial. Don't forget, you don't have to add that D-ring on if you don't want to. You could just skip that whole bit. And I'll put chapters in the video so you can do that easily. Now, I think these make great gift ideas, and I think they're so much fun to make. I'm sure once you try one, you'll make many. And if you prefer PDF patterns, I also do have a pattern over on my Etsy shop. I'll put a link down below. You guys, I think I've got the cutest fall tutorial for you ever. Now, it's really quite a funny little project, but I'm just so thrilled with how it turned out. I want to show you how to make a lattice pie pot holder or trivet. Now, I keep referring to it as a pot holder, but I think it would be absolutely adorable on your table for Thanksgiving with a pumpkin pie on top or whatever pie you like. Let me show you how to make one. For this project, you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric, and I'll explain to you exactly how to work out what size you need in just a minute. I'm using 12 inches by 12 inches squared. I've got a nice pattern piece for the front of my pie, and the back piece is cream because I think that looks the cutest. It kind of looks like crust. Then I'm using some Insul Bright, which is going to go in between. Now, a lot of people have left comments saying that whenever you use Insul Bright, you should also use a layer of regular batting as well, because it gives you extra protection. So I think if you've got some, that's what you should do. I don't actually have any regular batting at the moment, so I'm just going to stick with how I usually do it. But those are just some comments I've been getting that it works much better with the 2 layers. You're going to need some jumbo rickrack, and you're going to need a couple of packets of bias tape because we need just over 3.5 yards, and a packet is usually only about 3 yards. To get our perfect circle shape, you're going to need a plate to trace around, so find a plate that you're happy with the size. Our pot holder will work out to be almost exactly the same size as the plate. We're not turning it right sides out and losing some of our fabric, so it will actually stay exactly the same size. Then what you need to do is take a tape measure and measure across the diameter. This one here is 10.5 inches, and then we're going to add on 1.5 inches. So that means for me, I've cut my fabric at 12 inches by 12 inches squared, and also my batting. Remembering I'm just using Insul Bright batting, but you might also want to use a layer of regular batting as well. So now what we're going to do is layer our fabrics. So I'm going to have the fabric that I'd like to be the bottom of my pie at the bottom, with the wrong side facing me. Mine's just cream, so there's not a right or wrong side. Then I'm going to put my Insul Bright batting on, and then I'm going to put my pie fabric, well, the fabric that I'd like to be my pie, on the top with the right sides facing me. So we've got a nice little sandwich there, kind of like we're sandwiching a quilt. So I've got all my edges lined up really nicely. Then what I'm going to do is take my plate and pop it right in the center. So I've got about the same space on all 4 sides, all these edges here that come close to the edge of our fabric. Then I'm going to take a washable fabric marker. It doesn't really matter what you use because we won't see it. And I'm just going to trace around the entire edge of my plate. Okay. There we go. That looks great. So now what we want to do is we want to make sure it is still all smoothed out really nicely. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to flip it over and check that the back is all nicely smoothed out, and it is. I'll flip it back over. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some pins, and I'm just going to pin it in place, because what we're going to do now is sew around the edge of our circle, not on the circle, but about 1/4 inch around the edge of it, just to keep all the layers in place. So we want to make sure it's all still nicely laid out, nice and smooth. These layers don't need to be perfect, but it does need to be smooth. So when I say these layers don't need to be perfect, I mean this bottom one's peeking out a bit here, but so long as it's within our circle on the back there, that's going to be fine. So just pop in as many pins as you'd like, just to make sure it's staying where it's meant to be. If you'd like to, and if you're a quilter, you might want to use your basting pins so the pins don't stab you when you're trying to sew it. Okay, that's looking pretty good to me. Now what I'm going to do is sew around this edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I did pop in a few extra pins just to help keep it in place. And if you've got basting spray, that would be another option, just to make sure our 3 layers stay in place. So now what I'm going to do is just stitch around the outside edge with about 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm not worrying about a back stitch, and I've put my stitch length all the way up to my maximum of 6. removing any pins if they're getting in your way. It's kind of looking a bit bunched up there, so I'm going to pull that one out and smooth it out. Now the stitching around the edge doesn't have to be perfect. It's literally just holding our 3 layers in place. Coming back to where we started, cutting with thread and then removing all the pins. So for the bias tape, we need extra wide double fold, and for all the supplies, I've got them over on my website. I'll put a link in the description below. Now I have given it a press because it sits much nicer and is easier to work with when it is pressed. We need to have 4 columns with our bias tape going across, so what I'm going to do is just do my best guess. We want about the same space in between them. I'm just going to guess, and then we're going to come along and measure it so that it's approximately the same. So just doing our best guess at this point, and we just want to cut it so it's past the stitches at the top and the bottom. Okay, and then what I like to do is make sure that the bias is all facing the same way. For example, the folders on this side. So just make sure the folders on the left side for all of them. It just again means it will sit nicer and consistently. Then there's also a shorter edge. So I can see that the shorter edge is on this side. You can see, I don't know if you can see there, that the back is kind of popping through to the front. So I'm actually just going to turn that around so that the longer side is on the top. And I'll check that for all of them. Sometimes it's hard to see. Doesn't really make too much of a difference on some pieces, but on some pieces it's really obvious. So that is correct. Okay, I probably just should have checked it was up the right way before I cut it. So now what I'm going to do is take my ruler. Sorry, one more thing. If you're using directional fabric, it's at this point you'd make sure it's sitting how you'd want it to sit with your lattice on top. So I know for my size, if I measure 1 3/4 inches from the stitches, that's there, and then if I measure it again, that's going to get them all pretty even. So now I'm going to place that 1 3/4 inches on the edge of my bias and measure. Okay, so that's about right. Now I'm going to pin it in place, and if you'd like, you can just check it again before you pin it. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it does also help keep it nice and straight, so you can butt that up against it, remembering to make sure it just comes past those stitch lines. And I'm just trying to pin it so that it's staying really nice and flat, because that's how it will be sewn down. So that one's looking really good. Then I'm going to come across again and find my 1 3/4 inches, butt it up against it and pin. Now this is the measurement for my plate. So you would just do your best guess at what measurement is going to work and do that. And the whole reason I didn't pin it the first time I went around was just to check that I did in fact have the right measurement. It looks like it's bending a bit there. It is tricky to get it to sit flat and pin it. The pins kind of tend to want to push it out of shape a bit. And at this point, if you had some of that special double-sided sewing tape, that would be really handy. You could just stick these down. This would be the perfect project for some of that tape. Okay, and then I'm just going to carry on for the remaining pieces. So now I'm going to stitch along both sides. I've got my stitch length set at 3, which is nice and long and decorative. I've got my left compensating foot on, which is a Juki foot that you can get. And what it has is a ledge here that I can butt my bias binding up against, and I'll get perfect stitches all the way down. If you don't have one, then you just stitch at about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the edge on both sides. We're not going to worry about a back stitch. Oh, I forgot to say, I'm starting on the side that's folded over. I find you'll get a much nicer, tidier finish if you sew down those double-sided edges first and then do the folded edge on the other side second. Remove your pins as you need to. I just gave it a quick press so it's sitting really nice and flat, and then I'm going to do exactly the same with my bias binding coming down this way. So I'll take my first piece, I've already pre-cut them, I'll measure again, but this time I'll also find a line on my ruler and line it up with my bias binding to make sure that it's on the 90-degree angle, meaning that it's nice and straight. So I'll just carry on going across this way now, doing exactly the same. Pinning, measuring, and then sewing it on. And now what I'm going to do is take my fabric scissors and cut around the edge that I drew with my washable marker at the very beginning. So I'll just take my time and follow that line. Okay, there we go. You can start seeing the pie coming to shape now. Now we did cut over our stitches. Don't worry, what we're going to do now is attach our binding to close it all in. So I've just got more binding now, and I'm just going to place it around loosely to measure how much I need. And then we want to come and have a little bit extra, about 5 inches extra. So I'm going to cut it at about there. So this is probably about 40 inches if you were measuring it, but depending on your size, you're going to need a different length. So just do it like that, and then let's give it a quick press, and I'll see you at the sewing machine. So now we need to work out where we want to be the top for our little loop, and I think it looks nicer on the diagonal to have that at the top rather than these coming across and up and down. So I'm just going to turn mine to the side there, and right here is where I want my top to be. So what I'm going to do is take my my bias tape, which I'm going to use as binding. We're going to open it up, and then we're going to sandwich it so that we've got our pie in between the bias tape there, just like that. And where I want my top to be, I'm just starting a little bit before it, because if that's the very dead center top, I've just started maybe half an inch before that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slowly sew this on and go all around the edge ever so slowly. If you're uncomfortable doing this, you could pin it in place before you sew it. I find it just works just as well not pinning, but do whatever you're most comfortable with. I'm still stitching at stitch length 3, and I'm still using my left compensating foot. Again, if you don't have one, then just stitch very close to the edge, using about a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just making sure it's nicely sandwiched in there, just a few inches ahead of where I'm sewing, and then I'll just keep fixing it as I go. So then I'll stop, make sure it's nicely sandwiched, and I can see the edge really pushing up against the fold there. And I'll come around a bit, and then I'll check it again, opening it up, pushing it in, and just take your time with this. It's not a race. Following around on that edge. Oh, it can be a little bit fiddly. Okay, so I'm coming back up to where I started, And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place the binding right over where we started, and then I'm going to carry on stitching until I get right to where I want to be my top part. And then I'm going to pull my binding away and then stitch along my binding, sewing it closed. So it doesn't have to be exact. We just want to go right back past where we started. And now I'm coming up to where I want to be my top. I'll just do a few stitches. Now I'm going to just gently pull it to the side and then follow that line right off my little pie here. Sewing along the whole length to close it. Just coming right off the edge and then cutting my thread. Okay, so now we've enclosed it. It's looking really nice and tidy. Let's sew our rickrack on, and then we'll address this last little bit at the very end. Now we're going to attach our jumbo rickrack. Now I'm using the one from Hobby Lobby, which really is jumbo. I was really happy with how big it is. This one here you can see is Wright's, and I got that one from Joanne, and that's also jumbo rickrack. But I'd say it's about half the size, so just be careful of that. I mean, I'm sure it would be just as cute, but I think this jumbo one is absolutely perfect. So just like before, I'm not going to pin it on, and we also have a lot of layers, so it is getting a bit harder. You could clip it. Now I'm thinking clipping it would probably help, but it is pretty easy just to place it in position and sew it around, and I'll show you how just now. So making sure you've got enough rickrack to go all the way around. I'm actually just using the last little piece from my spool from my samples that I made, and I just left it on the spool and sewed it and cut it exactly where I needed to, so there was no wastage. Now what we're going to do is place it right on the top here, right where we want our top to be, and then we're going to sew it on. And to make sure it's in the middle, I'm just making sure that I'm placing it right on top of my bias binding, and I can see the binding peeking through a little bit at the top there and at the bottom there. So I'm just going to check that it's about that much at the top and at the bottom when I sew it all the way around. So just starting at the beginning there. Now I'm just using my regular foot, and I only have a straight stitch because Juki's, the TL series, only do a straight stitch. But I would do a zigzag now if I had one on my sewing machine. I'm still stitching at stitch length 3, and I'm not going to worry about a back stitch because we're going to come right over the top. And I'm just aiming down the center there. It's the zigzag, so I'm just aiming right down that center. And if you're not confident doing this, I really think that clips would be your best bet to just keep it all in place as you're sewing around. Okay, so we're just coming right up to where we started. I'll just come a little bit past that, and then I'll do a back stitch, and then go forward again, and then cut my thread. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to cut that excess off. So we're from just past where I stopped stitching, I'm just going to cut it. I'm going to cut that thread as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the leftover bias binding that we've just got hanging here, and I'm going to fold it over and then work out how long I'd like my loop to be. And I think that looks about right. You can have yours as long as you want. If you wanted it even longer, you would have made this little bit extra long when we did that step. And then I'm just going to fold it in half, this bottom bit, just fold it over and pop it on top, and check that I'm happy with it, and it's sitting right in the center with there where I wanted it to be, and it's hiding all the rickrack working as well. So when you're happy, you could pin that or clip that in place, but I'm just going to hold it, pop it under, and stitch right over the top, keeping it in place. I'm going through quite a few layers, so you might want to stitch slowly. Then I'll do a back stitch, and I'll just do that a couple more times so it's nice and secure. cut my threads, and there we have it. We've got our cute little, oh, let me cut that thread, sorry. There we have it, our cute little lattice pie pot holder. Now I did give it another press. This is another one that I made with larger strawberries. Isn't it super cute? You can find all sorts of fabric that would work really well for this. I know some people use really realistic fabric with like cherries and pumpkins and what have you, and they look really neat. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It really helps me out. Hey everyone, it's Stacey, and I'm so excited that today we're going to be doing our first Quilt As You Go project. And what that means is as we're sewing, we're also quilting. And if you look on the back here, you can see it's all nicely quilted, and we did that as we sewed the pieces on together. So we're going to be making this really cute table runner. You could also make it any size you wanted, as well as matching placemats. Once you know the technique, you're going to see how easy it is, and it's really easy to adapt it to any size you'd like. But for now, I'll give you instructions how to make this table runner. You'll also find the details in the description below. So let's get going and make our first Quilt As You Go project. So I've got my batting here, and that measures 14 inches by 44 inches. And then I've got my backing, and that's 15 inches wide. And then it's the full width of fabric, so that just means I've bought it by the yard and I've got the full width here. So all I've done is I've placed the right side of the fabric down, smoothed it out. Of course I did give it a quick press before I started. Then I've got my batting and I've popped that on top, and I've made sure that I've got a little bit of space all around, and I've made sure that the batting is sitting in the middle of the backing. The backing is slightly bigger than my batting, so I'm going to smooth it all out. And then what I'm going to do is just flip it over carefully and just check what it's looking like on this side. So I can see it's a bit wrinkled. So I'm just going to smooth that out. And then once I'm happy, I will just flip that back over. If your batting was all wrinkled, by the way, you could give it a quick press. What I did was I pressed mine with the fabric on top so it didn't singe or anything. I don't know if batting singes, but I didn't want to find out. So once we're happy that it's all nicely smoothed out, I'm just going to take some pins and pop them around the edges just to keep it in place. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to really roughly sew around the edge so it's not going to go anywhere, the backing and the batting, when we're sewing our pieces on. Now these can be a little bit prickly when we're sewing, so if you don't like them being loose like this when you're sewing, you could always use your basting pins if you find them easier. Okay, let's sew. So what we're doing now is we're just basting it, which just means we're just doing a rough stitch just to keep it in place for when we're sewing, and then we will be cutting this off. So I've got my walking foot on. You might want to use a regular foot, that's entirely up to you. And I'm just going to stitch quite close to the edge because, like I said, we will be cutting this off. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 3, so it's a nice big stitch just to get around quite quickly. Okay, so now I'm just coming right back around to where I started. I actually ended up changing my stitch length to 5. I'm doing a back stitch, I don't know why, that's just by habit. We don't even need to worry about a back stitch. But I did end up changing my stitch length to 5 because, like I said, I just really wanted to tack it down quite quickly. Okay, so just cutting the threads. And now let's start doing the quilt top. So I've got my backing here that I sewed together, and I'm just folding it in half, and I'm going to finger press it on the fold here just so I know where the middle is. And then I'm going to open it up, and I can see that the middle's here where I just folded it. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. And then we're going to take our strips and sew them on. For the pieces for the top, I've cut them at 2.5 inches by 14 inches and I have 21 pieces in total. What I did was I used 7 different fabrics and I cut a 2.5 inch strip, and then from each strip I was able to get 3 of my pieces. But you might like to use scrap fabric or just make them up however you'd like, but just remember we need 21 pieces at 2.5 inches by 14 inches. So I'll just take my first piece, and what I'm going to do is line it up the edge of my piece with the right sides facing me along that crease when I folded it in half, and then I'm going to line the top of my piece and the bottom of my piece with the top and the bottom of the batting and smooth it out. And once I'm happy it's in the right place, I'll take my next piece, and if you're using directional fabric, just keep an eye on that. With the second piece I'm going to face it down so it's right sides down and the right sides facing each other. And I'm going to line up the edges and the top and the bottom, and once I'm happy that's in the correct place, I'm just going to pop some pins in. And now I'm just going to sew along that edge. So I've got my walking foot on, you can use a standard foot if you'd prefer, and I've just worked out my best guide to get approximately 1/4 inch. Now it doesn't matter if it's a little bit off as long as you sew all the seams at the same width. So I'm just going to start at the very edge there. I'm not going to worry about a back stitch, and I am going to stitch at stitch length 2. And then coming up to the edge, I'm just going to sew right up to the edge. Lift my foot up, trim the threads, and then I'm going to give that a quick press. So now I'm just going to set the stitches, and I'm just going to be careful of my batting. I don't know if batting singes, but I've never really tried it, but I don't want to find out. So just being extra careful of the batting. Then I'm going to just fold that over, finger press it, make sure it's sitting nice and flat, and then just press. Now we'll sew our next pieces on. So now I'm going to take my next piece that I want to sew here, and I'm going to sew mine in a pattern. So that's this piece. So I'm going to take it, place it right sides down, line up the edges along this edge and along the top and the bottom, and once I'm happy I'm just going to pop some pins in. And now I'm going to take the piece that I want to sew here. So this is the last piece in my pattern, so I'm going to come right back to the beginning and take this piece, and this one is directional, so I'm going to make it so it's facing me, and then I'm going to face it right sides together with the piece that's already there, line up those edges on the side and the top and the bottom, and then pin it into place. Okay, now we'll sew those. So now I'm just going to do exactly what I did the first time. I'm just going to stitch with 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to begin right at the beginning and sew right to the very end, and I'll do that for both sides. Okay, so now let's press those two pieces. So once again, I'm just going to set those stitches, which helps them set into place like the name suggests, as well as help the quilt top lay flatter. And then I'll just open it up. So I'll open it up, finger press it, so it's sitting really nicely, and press. And then I'll do the same for this side, finger pressing and pressing it. I want it to all be sitting really nicely, so I'm just going to give it a once over. And now we'll sew the next two pieces on. So now I'm just going to do exactly the same. I'm going to take the next piece that I'd like to go here, which is this piece, face it right sides down, line up the edges on the side, the top and the bottom, and then pin it into place. And then I'll do this side. And then I'm just going to sew along those seams, press and repeat on until I've used all my strips up. And if you do end up with a bit of extra left over, don't worry, we're going to trim it off. Or if you've got too much left over for some reason, you could always cut a few extra strips and just keep going. So now you can see I've sewn all my pieces on. I could have put one more at the end here, but I didn't worry about it because I used up all my pieces from the 7 different fabrics. But you could add one on if you'd like. If I flip it over, we can see that it's been quilted because it was quilt as you go, which is really cool. Now what we need to do is square it up and get a really nice rectangle shape. So what I'm going to do is take my ruler, and we're actually going to find the middle. So if I fold it in half, the middle is about here. So I'm going to place my ruler in the middle, and I'm going to cut a line down here first. Now we've got an inch on either side to play with, so we don't have to worry if some of these ends are coming in a little bit. So I'm going to place this seam here on 12, and then what I'm going to do is line up as many of those seams as I can on a line to see if it's looking straight, or as straight as it can be. It might not be perfect, and it could also be a bit wonky, so you might want to sort of pull it into shape and get it looking as square as possible before you even start this process. So I think that's looking pretty good. Like if I come along here to 3/4 of an inch, I'll just shimmy that across. That looks good. Now it won't be perfect unless your sewing is absolutely perfect, but that looks pretty good to me. So I'm just going to do that first cut right in the middle there, which is unusual. We don't normally do that. So I'm just going to cut. You can see I've got my first cut there. Now I'm just going to bring it down, line up my ruler with the edge, and finish this bottom piece. Then bring it to the top and finish off the top. So I'm just going to line up the edge I've cut with my ruler. You can also check that some of the lines are lining up with your seams again. And then when you're happy, cut. And now we've got our first cut edge. Now I'm going to cut this side. So I'll just line up this edge that I just cut on a line on my ruler. Make sure it's all smoothed out. And then I'm just going to cut along this edge. I can see it is a little bit wonky, but so long as it's straight on this edge, it's fine. And wonky, I mean I've cut more off the top here of this top fabric, and as I've come down, I've not cut any. And then what we're going to do is square off the second side. So I'll just flip that around. Now I feel like I'm working a bit backwards. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually just going to cut the second side. I'm just going to do exactly the same. I'm going to line up the edge that I cut with the line on my ruler. Make sure this is all smoothed out. Lining it up the best I can on this edge and then cutting the excess off. And now I'll do this final edge. Now we did make it a little bit wider than we needed to, just so we had room for error. So if you've got a particular size in mind, I would line it up on the 0. And I wanted to cut mine at 12 inches. You might think, well, I just want to get it as wide as I can, and in which case you check all these edges here. Make sure that you're getting all the nice fabrics in there and then just cutting off the minimum amount of excess that you'd like to, or line it up on 12. So it's really hard to work out 12 inches wide when we can't see where 12 inches is up here. So what I'm going to do is just with a pencil, I'm just going to mark a few markings. So I'm going to find 12 inches on my ruler. So 12 inches is here, which makes 0 here. I'm going to make sure it's lined up on the edge, and I'll just do a really light mark, just in a few different spots. And that should be enough, just as a guide. So all I'll do now is once again line up the line on my ruler with the edge of my table runner here, find 12 on my mat, and now I'm just going to line it up with a couple of the little marks that I just made. So it's important to line them up with at least 2, because if you line it up with 1, it could be just slightly off to the left or the right. So making sure that's all lined up. And then I'll just bring that down. And now I'm just going to entirely rely on the marks that I just did. Missed a bit there. Okay, so now it's all squared up. So now we need to bind it. So basically it's just a mini quilt. So you can bind it however you would normally bind your quilts. And if you're not sure how to do the binding, I'll put a link in the description below with another video showing you exactly how to do the binding. And I'll see you when it's finished. So there you go, guys. Wasn't that super easy? I do plan to do a few more Quilt As You Go projects in the future, so keep an eye out for them. And we're now wrapping up our donation quilts for National Foster Care. I just want to thank everyone so much for participating. Within our group, we organised 85 quilts to go to comfort cases, and I think there's a few more that will be sent on, which means we're probably going to make just over 100 quilts, and I think that is an amazing effort. And I just think it's absolutely beautiful that children will have handmade quilts to call their very own. Let's make fun and practical lavender bags. They're perfect to use up your scrap fabrics, and they're perfect to give away as gifts. Let me show you how. So to make our little pinwheel, I'm going to take 2 pieces of fabric that both measure 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches square. I'm going to place them right sides together, line up all the edges, and then I will just pop some pins in so it stays in place. Now we're going to sew around the edge, so I'm going to put my pins in the center like this so they don't get in the way. Okay, let's go to the sewing machine. So I've got a 1/4 inch foot on to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm stitching at stitch length 2. We want a really nice compact stitch so our lavender doesn't fall out, and I'm using wonderful confetti thread. I'm going to start on the very edge and sew right along to the bottom edge. I'm going to come right off the edge, pull it around and then turn it and then start on the next edge, and we'll do this for all 4 sides. Okay, so I've sewn along all 4 edges. I'm going to just remove my pins, and now let's cut. Now what we're going to do is cut it diagonally from corner to corner on both sides. So I'm just going to take my ruler, line it up where the stitches intersect at the top and at the bottom, and then cut. And then I'm just going to turn it and do the same on this side. It's moved slightly, so I'm just going to fix it. Now we have our 4 half square triangles. Let's press. So I'm just going to press the stitches and then open it up and press towards our dark fabric. I'm going to finger press so we don't have any creases in there, and then press, and I'll repeat that for all 4 half square triangles. Now for all the half square triangles, I'm just going to trim them down so they measure 2.5 inches square. So I'm just going to find the diagonal line on my ruler, place it on top of the seams, find my 2.5 inch mark, and then trim. And because I don't have it exactly a 2.5 inch ruler, I do just have to turn it once I've done the 2 sides. Find that diagonal line again, find my 2.5 inch marking, and then cut on the remaining 2 sides. Okay, and then I'll repeat that for all 4 half square triangles. So then take all our half square triangles and place them so that they create our pinwheel. Okay, just like that, and you can just double check that it is creating the pinwheel. Then all we're going to do is take take the first row and sew those 2 pieces together, take the second row and sew those pieces together, and then we'll sew each of the rows together. So I'll do that now. So I'm just going to give it a quick press. I'm going to press that last seam open, and you can press it to the side if you want. It doesn't really matter. It's a little bit fiddly. And if you wanted to, you could have pressed the rows when we sewed them together. I didn't worry too much because this is more of a craft project than going to be a pinwheel that we use on a quilt. I'll just give that a press on the top too. Let's move on to the next step. So now we've got our finished pinwheel, a piece for the backing that measures 4.5 inches squared, and a piece of ribbon that measures 8 inches. The ribbon is optional, and that's just if you'd like to hang your little lavender bag on, let's say, a coat hanger or what have you. So I'm just going to take my ribbon and fold it in half. My ribbon has a wrong side, so I'm going to face it wrong sides together. Sorry, I'm a bit tongue twisted. Line up these edges here, and then I want to place it right on my point there. I just want to check that it's going to be coming past the back there. That looks pretty good. And we can line it up with that seam to make sure it's nice and centered. And that looks pretty good to me. And then what I'm going to do is take my backing and place that on top. And then I'm just going to really carefully, and we've placed the backing right sides together, I'm just going to place a pin right through that ribbon, holding everything in place there. So all my edges are lined up. I've got the pin holding the ribbon, and then I will just pop a few more pins in to keep it in place. We're going to sew right around the edge again, so I'm popping my pins in like this. And then what we need to do is leave an opening. So you can just remember to leave an opening, or if you'll forget, we could just mark one. So I'll just mark one on the side here. It's probably about 3 inches. We just need it big enough to be able to turn it right sides out. So what I'm going to do is start at this mark, sew all the way around, and then finish at this second mark. I'm actually going to sew in the opposite direction that I just said. Sorry if that's a bit confusing. I'm starting right on that mark that I did, and I'm going to go forward a few stitches and then go back a few stitches. And then I'm just going to go all the way around. When I come up to my corners, I'm going to do my best guess of a 1/4 inch seam allowance, make sure my needle's down, lift my foot up and turn. And if I've gone a little bit too far like that, I can just swing it back around and do one more stitch and try again. Okay, that looks better. I'll just carry on until I've come back to that second marking. Okay, now we're going to remove our pins and move on to the next step. So I'm just going to trim all the corners, getting close to the stitches but making sure I don't cut the stitches, just to remove the bulk. And I'm not going to cut the side where we have the ribbon. I'm not going to worry about that because we don't want it to pull through. So once I'm happy, I'm going to turn it right sides out. So I'm going to find my opening, pop my fingers in and grab a corner and pull it through. And then we want it to sit really nicely. So at this point we can get a point turner. And if you don't have a point turner, you could use something like a chopstick. I do recommend point turners because they're just such a wonderful tool and you'll use it so much, and it really helps get everything sitting really nicely. So we can not only fix our corners there, our points, but we can also run it along the seams to make sure it's all sitting really nicely. And then when I'm happy, I will just give that a quick press. So I'm just going to find my opening and make sure that's pressed nicely so it looks like the opening was never there. We just want to fold those edges in about 1/4 inch because that was our seam allowance. And then when I'm happy, I'll give that a press. And then I'll give the whole thing a press. And also flip it over to the other side. Okay, let's fill our little bag with lavender. So I've got dried lavender here, which you can find really inexpensively on somewhere like Amazon. Do make sure it's dried because if it's fresh, it might go a bit moldy. So make sure it's dried, and then we're just going to pop some in our little opening there. Okay, this is going to be a little bit messy. Maybe I could have left the opening a little bigger to make this part a bit easier. Now, we don't need it to be completely packed, and you can't smell it, but it does smell absolutely beautiful. And once it loses its scent, you can always just drop a few essential oil drops on there, lavender oil drops. Okay, I might just put a little bit more in. So it doesn't have to be completely packed. Okay, I think that's about right. So now what we're going to do is sew this opening closed. Well, first of all, I'm going to clean up all this lavender, and then let's sew our openings closed. So I'm just going to sew with about a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just to close up that opening. Now I'm going to go forward a few stitches and then do a back stitch. And if you'd prefer, you could actually do this by hand if you wanted it to be a little bit less obvious. But I think it's going to be fine. And if you wanted to, you could actually sew around the whole edge. You might need to just like maneuver the lavender out a bit so it doesn't get into those seams. But I'm just going to sew my opening closed and leave it at that. I'll just trim that loose thread there. You can hardly even notice that opening. So there we have our finished lavender bag. Isn't that just darling? Now you can see it's not completely full at all, but it definitely does have quite a substantial amount of lavender in there. Now I've done the pinwheel on the front. You could also do a pinwheel on the back, or you could have the front and back just plain like this. And the ribbon is also optional. You could just do them without the ribbon and do a set of 3 and then tie a piece of ribbon on to that, making it a set, which is also really cute. Now what I like to do is every now and then with my lavender bags is I will give them a bit of a scrunch and a squeeze, which kind of releases the lavender smell again. And then once I think it's not smelling so nice anymore, I just pop a few lavender oil drops onto it just to keep it smelling really nice. But I think these make fantastic gift ideas for absolutely anyone, even guys in your life. You could use a nice manly fabric, and I think this would be nice to be hanging in their wardrobes too. And ladies, these are also great to put in with your fabrics to keep them smelling really nice and fresh as well. So I have to do a quick shout out about the fabric that I used. Wasn't it really pretty? And it also, that ribbon was matching. I don't know if you noticed. It's called Genesis of a Journey, and it's by my friend Janice Hall, who is only 16 years old, for Riley Blake. I'm going to put a link down below if you'd like to check out the full range. It's absolutely incredible, just like her, so I just wanted to do a quick shout out. Hey everyone, it's Stacey. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make this super cute summer tote bag. Now, it's extra sturdy. We've got a nice flat bottom here, and we also have pockets inside. I'm super happy with it, and I'll be thrilled to bits if you make one too. So let me show you how I made it. To make the summer tote bag, you'll need half a yard canvas for the outer bag, 5/6 of a yard 100% cotton for the lining, half a yard or 1 yard of fusible interfacing Palon Shape Flex SF101, and this is optional, 2 yards of cotton webbing for the straps. So give all your fabric a good press, and then for the outer fabric, we'll cut 2 pieces at 21 by 18 inches, and if you bought half a yard, that will work perfectly with directional fabric. Then you need to cut 1 pocket, and that needs to be 21 inches by 10 inches, and I've cut that with the lining fabric. And again with the lining fabric, we need to cut 2 pieces at 21 inches by 18 inches. And if you're choosing to use Palon Shape Flex SF101, you need to cut either 2 or 4 pieces at 21 inches by 18 inches. Now all the Shape Flex will do is give it more body and structure. So you might like to use it on your outer fabric, your lining, both or neither. That's entirely up to you. Today I'm going to be using it on my lining fabric. So first off, let's start with preparing our pocket. So now I've got my pocket here. If your fabric has a wrong side, then make sure that side is facing up towards you. And then all we're going to do is, along this longer edge here, we're going to fold it over about 1/2 inch. I'm just going to do it by eye and give it a little finger press. You might like to use a tape measure. Just give a little finger press, and then I'm just going to press that down. And then all I'm going to do is fold it over again. Just giving it another finger press, and then I'll press that again. Then I'm just going to pop in some pins just to keep it in place when we're sewing it. Just going to turn it around. So now I'm just going to pop in a few pins so that it stays in place, because we're just going to sew a top stitch along this edge. Okay, let's do our first bit of sewing. So now I'm just using Gutermann thread, which is what I like to use when I'm just doing general sewing. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2.5, and all I'm going to do is do a top stitch. So I'm going to stitch as close as I can to this folded over edge here. I'm not going to worry about a back stitch because this is purely decorative to hide that raw edge. So I'm just going to stitch right off the edge and then trim the threads, trim it at the beginning as well, so we're staying nice and tidy as we go. And you can see I've just stitched very close to the edge just to hold that fold down. So I've got my Palon Shape Flex SF101 here, and what we're going to do is iron on each of the pieces to my lining. Now you might not want to do Shape Flex, or you might want to do it to your outer as well, or both, or none at all. It's entirely up to you. Today I'm just doing my lining. So I've got my Shape Flex here. I've got the glue or the rough side facing up. I'm going to smooth it out the best I can. Then I'm going to take a piece of my lining and pop it on top with the right side facing me. And then I'm just going to line up all those edges. Now it doesn't quite fit on my ironing board, so I'll have to do the top part and then the bottom part. And I just want to make sure that none of it's peeking out. If anything, you might want to cut your Shape Flex just a smidgen smaller, so it's definitely not coming out, because we don't want the glue on our iron. You could also use a cloth, put a cloth over the top to protect it. I have turned my iron down to the wool setting, and we do have the steam on because it needs the damp heat. And we need to press it for about 10 seconds in each place. And then we just slowly move down. So just take your time, otherwise it won't adhere properly. So just take your time and move down slowly and repeat this until you've done the whole piece of lining. Okay, so once it's done, you can just turn it over and check that you're happy with it. You shouldn't really have any air bubbles in it. I'm just going to give those a little press to get them out. And then repeat this for the other piece, or if you're doing your outer, also do your outer fabric. Okay, and then let's move on to the next step. So now I've got my lining with the right side facing me. You can see I've got my shape flex facing down. I'm just going to take my pocket and line that up on the sides and at the bottom, so all those edges are lined up nicely, and I'm facing that with the right sides up now. If you've got fabric that has a good side, that will now be facing you, and that seam we did is now facing inside because that will be our pocket. When you're happy that's all lined up nicely, then we're going to take our second piece of lining and we're going to place that on top with the right sides facing down, and then we're going to make sure all those edges are lined up really nicely. And then once we're happy, what we're going to do is we're going to draw a 3-inch square on both of the corners. So starting in this corner, I'm just going to measure 3 inches. This square rule is actually 3.5 inches, so I just have to be careful. So if I count 1, 2, 3, that's correct, it is 3 inches. So just be sure you're cutting it at the right amount. So it's 3 inches on each corner, and I'll do the same on this corner. Well, making sure I am in fact doing 3 inches. You're not going to see any of these working, so don't worry about leaving a mark. Then I'm just going to take my dressmaking scissors and carefully lift it up and cut these corners off. We want all the layers to stay in place, so just be careful. Gosh, my scissors weren't very sharp. And then I'm going to come to the other corner and do exactly the same, making sure I don't accidentally move any of these pieces. Okay, and then once we've done that, we're just going to pull this top piece off and just come back and finish off our pocket. So I'm just going to take a chalk pencil and I'm just going to draw a line from the edge that we've cut here all the way along here, and we're just going to sew there to keep our pocket secure, and so it's going to sit really nice once we've sewn it together. And then I'm going to do the same on this side, making sure it's nice and straight by lining up an edge of the fabric on a line on my ruler. Again on this side. And then I'm just going to draw as many lines as I'd like pockets. So these pockets here will be super small. In fact, you might not even use them because they're on the side. You might like to have one nice sort of smaller one that's perfect for a phone. And then I'll just use the whole width of my ruler, and you know it's straight because if you can line up the edge of the fabric on a line on your ruler. And I'll just draw another line. It doesn't really matter where these lines are. You might like to do them quite small and put pencils or pens in them, just whatever you like. And then I will just pop in a few pins to keep it in place and sew along all the lines that we just drew. I didn't pop the pins in earlier because they would have got in the way when we were drawing our lines. Okay, so first I'll start off with this bottom line. So now I'm just going to follow the lines. They are very light, but I can just ever so faintly see them. I'm not going to worry about a back stitch for this bottom one. Okay, and then just trimming the threads. And now I'm going to sew along all the lines that I drew going this way. But when I start, I will start at the top and I will do a back stitch. So I'll stitch down about 3 or 4 stitches, reverse all the way back up to the beginning and then carry on again, because it's a pocket and we want it to be nice and strong. If things get put in there, it will sort of pull at it a little bit. And I will just do a back stitch at the bottom just to make them extra strong. Okay, and then trimming our thread again. Finding the next line and then carrying on until I've sewn all my pockets. And then when I'm coming up to my line, that's going to be the end of my pocket, so I will just stop there. Like I said, I'll do a back stitch and then carry on back down just so they're super strong. Okay, once you're finished, let's take all those pins out. So now I've got my one piece of lining that I just sewed the pockets onto. I'm going to take the second piece again and then I'm going to face them right sides together, line up all those edges, including the squares that we cut earlier. And once that's all lined up nicely, I'm going to pop pins in along this edge and the 2 sides, and we're going to sew along those edges. Now you can use as many or as little pins as you like, but remembering it does help keep everything in place nicely. Okay, so once we've pinned, all we're going to do is sew along both sides and this bottom piece. We're not worrying about the corner that we cut out just yet. So now I'm going to sew along those edges with a 1/2 inch to a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I've just worked out the best guide for me, so you might just want to check that first. I'm still stitching at stitch length 2.5, and I will just do a back stitch so it's nice and strong. We want our bags to be extra sturdy. And then when I come down to the end again, I'll do a back stitch. Trim the threads and do the same for the other 2 sides. Okay, so let's remove those pins and give it a quick press. So now we're just going to press these seams open. So I'm just going to press them open on this side, then we'll flip it over and do it on the other side. You can just give it a little finger press to make sure they're sitting nicely. And I'll just flip it over and do the same on this side. Okay, let's move on to the next step. So now for each of the corners, I'm just going to come up to them and open them up. And then what I'm going to do is line up the two seams. So lining up those seams and creating one nice straight line. And when I'm happy that they look like they're all matched up nicely, I'm just going to fold them back down, make sure these edges are also lined up. And then I will pop a few pins in just to keep them in place. We also want it lined up right to the very end, so line that up nicely and pop a pin in just so it stays there. And on this side as well. And then I'll do the same to the other side. Now let's just stitch those two ends closed. So everything's just the same as before, same as seam allowance, and I'm also going to do a back stitch to make it really nice and secure. Trim those threads while I'm here, and then do exactly the same on the other side. Oh, I can see that I've pinned that down. I don't want it like that, so I'm just going to lift that, remove the pin, and make it so that it is being sewed open, because we don't want it to be too bulky. We want it to be sitting really nicely. Okay, so now we've finished our lining and we've got our pocket inside. Let's just set that aside and work on our outer. So now we're going to make the outer part of our bag, and I am using directional fabric, so I'm just going to make sure it's facing the right way, and both pieces are. And all we're going to do is exactly the same process as we did for the inner, except we're not worrying about a pocket. Of course, you could add a pocket to the front if you wanted to. So all I'm going to do is face them right sides together, making sure the fabric is facing in the right direction if you're using directional fabric. And then we're going to do everything we did last time. I'm going to draw and cut 3-inch squares on both of the bottom corners. Then I'll pin it, sew it, and then press it open, and then I'll sew the corners closed again. So just repeat exactly the same process minus the pockets that we did for the inner. Finish making the outer part of our bag, I'm just going to turn it right sides out and get it sitting all nicely. And then what we want to do is come up to the top here and find those two seams, open them out, getting them to sit really nicely on either side, and then smoothing it out on the top here, because now we're about to attach our straps. So get that top part sitting really nicely, and then what we're going to do is we're going to measure 4.5 inches from the edge of the bag towards the center, and that's where we'll attach our first strap. And this ruler just happens to be exactly 4.5 inches. So I'll just make a mark there, and then I'm going to come over and do exactly the same on this side. So right on that edge, my ruler is 4.5 inches, just making a little mark on that side, and then we'll do the same on the other side. And so clearly these markings should be the same on both sides, and we'll see that when we attach the straps. So I've got my 32-inch straps here from Cotton Webbing. You might want to make your own straps if you'd like to with fabric that matches. I just wanted to change it up a bit, and it is a little bit easier just to buy the webbing. So what I'm going to do is line up the edge of the webbing on the line that I just drew, coming towards the center. So I'm not doing it on this side, I'm doing it on this side, lining it up with the edge at the top. And then I will just pop a couple of pins in to secure it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it onto this side, again lining up the edge with the line on this side that's coming in towards the bag, not on this side which would be coming to the edge of the bag. But we also want to make sure that it's not twisted. So just grab your strap and just run your hand around it and make sure that it's not twisted at all. And once you're happy, again pin it, lining it up with the edges. And then what we'll do is just flip it over and do exactly the same on this side, and then we can just double check that they are sitting perfectly matched on both sides. And if your webbing or your straps do have a good side and a bad side, make sure that the good side is facing down onto your bag. Okay, and then once you've pinned them, you can just lift your bag up and then hold it up and just check that the straps are in the same places on both sides of the bag, and this looks great. So now we're just going to sew them down. So now what we're going to do is sew our straps on. So we're going to do this 4 times, and I'm going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to start just before the strap, and then I'm going to sew right over the top and come right off it, and then I'm going to reverse back over it, and then I'm going to do that a couple of times so it's really nice and secure. And I'll repeat that for the other 3 strap ends. So now we've finished sewing our outer part of our bag and we've got our straps on. We're going to keep it with the right sides out, and then we're going to take our lining and we're going to pop our bag inside the lining, and we've got the lining on the wrong sides out. So if I look inside, that's the right side and I can see my pocket in there. So I'm just going to pop my bag inside. And we want the straps sitting down. We don't want to accidentally sew them into the bag. And then what we're going to do is, the easiest thing to do is to find the seams on the side. So I'm going to find the seam on the side for the lining, the seam inside for the outer bag. And what I'm going to do is line them up, open them up and check I'm creating a nice line. And when I am, I'm going to pin them, making sure it's also lined up on this top edge here. And when I'm happy, I'm going to pop a pin in on both sides. So just double checking we've got a nice straight line. And I'm just making sure I have pinned down the seams when they've been pressed open, so they are sitting nicely how I pressed them. Then I'll go to the other side of the bag and do exactly the same thing. Find that seam on that lining and the seam on the bag. So lining up that line again, popping a pin in on either side. Then I'm going to come to the side and I'm just going to check that my straps are tucked in there nicely, and they are. I'm going to come across to a seam and I'm just going to make sure those edges are lined up really nicely and come across to my strap. So I want it to just feel like I'm lining it up. I'm not stretching either the lining or the outer bag part. I'm just smoothing it out so it's all just going to fit nicely. I'll pop a pin in on that strap. And then what I'll do is I'll come back over to the other side and find the other strap and do exactly the same thing. Pop a pin in, and now I'll come into the middle and put another pin in, or you might want to put 2 in on the middle here. And if you'd like, you could put 1 in between the strap and the side seam. Just put in as many pins as you'd like to keep it all in place. And then I'll do exactly the same on the other side. So now what we're going to do is we're going to stitch around the edge here, but we do need to leave an opening so we can turn it right sides out. So what I'm going to do is, this is one side of the bag here, and I've got a strap here and a strap here. I'm going to start right before the second strap on this side, and then I'm going to come all the way around, and then when I get to the first strap on that side, I'm going to stitch just after the strap and then stop, and I'm going to leave this little piece here open so we can turn it right sides out, and then we'll sew that shut also. So you can stitch with a 1/2 inch or a 5/8 inch seam allowance, whatever you chose to do in the beginning. And I will do a back stitch because sometimes it does pull when you try and turn it right sides out again. Okay, so I'm coming back up to that strap, so I'm just going to stitch right over to the other side of the strap. I will do a back stitch, and just take your time with this. If you can see that some of the edges are not lined up, just pause, make sure your needle's down, and just adjust as you go. Okay, now this is the fun part. Let's remove that last pin, and now let's turn it right sides out. So finding our opening, remembering it's between our 2 straps, putting your hand in and grabbing the bag and pulling it out. It can be a bit fiddly. There we go. And then pushing that lining back inside. And just getting it sitting all nicely. And now you can really see our bag is coming together. Let's give it a press. So now what we're going to do is press these seams so they're sitting really nicely. And what we do is here, I'll find a bit where it's quite bad. You can see here where the lining's poking out. So that's not sitting great at all. So what I'll do is I'll roll it down so that it's sitting really nicely. We basically want it, if anything, the outer side showing more than the lining. So just roll it and get it to sit really nice. And then what we'll do is we'll give it a press so it will stay that way before we sew it. Okay, so this is a little bit fiddly, so just take your time with this. So that first bit that I've rolled out and it's sitting really nicely, I'll give it a press. And now what I'll do is I'm going to go around the whole edge of the bag and do that. And this is something, just really take your time, like we're really on the home stretch. Don't rush this because it's just these final details that really will make or break your bag and give it that really professional look. Oh, I'm all over the place here. So you can see here, if I just sewed it as it was, I'd have a big crease inside. So again, we're just rolling that out. And when we're happy, just pressing. Okay, and then when we come to our opening, let's just get it sitting really nice and flat. And what we want to do is we want to press it so those edges are sitting at about 1/2 inch inside the bag and creating a nice straight line, as if this opening was never here. Okay, and then once you think you've got it right, give that a press. And we can check it on the inside too. And also give it a press on the inside. Now let's sew around that edge, closing off our opening and finishing up our bag. So now I'm just going to come to my opening and pin it shut. Lining up the 2 folds where we pressed it, so it's going to sit really nicely once we sew it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start over here on my seam, so we're not drawing any attention to where we left the opening. And I'm going to stitch around the whole edge, doing a top stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've just come right back to where I started. I will do a back stitch so it's nice and secure. Trim the threads. And now we've finished our tote bag. Isn't that cute? So there we have my super cute summer tote bag, if I do say so myself. Now don't forget, you can customize it however you want. You might want to have more pockets. You might want to make the straps shorter or longer. I do tend to like really long straps. You might also want to make it bigger. Now I don't recommend using directional fabric if you do want to go much bigger, because you will have to buy a lot more. And for the lining, I also don't recommend directional fabric because you'll just need to buy double the amount because of the pocket. So do have fun with it and leave a comment and let me know if you enjoyed today's tutorial. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week. Hey my quilty friends, Christmas is just around the corner, so it's a perfect time to show you how to make a classic Christmas stocking. So grab your favorite Christmas fabric, and for me this year, it's Christmas in the Cabin by Art Gallery Fabrics. Give it a press and let's go. You can find a copy of these cutting instructions over on my website. I'll put a link in the description below. So we're going to start off by making our Christmas stocking top, and to do that we need to baste our lining, batting and top fabric. So I'm going to spray base mine. You might like to use pins. I'm going to be using this ODIF 505 temporary spray adhesive. So I'm just going to do a light coat, and I've got my lining fabric here with the right side facing down and the wrong side facing me. I'm going to just do a light coat. Everyone always tells me I use too much. Hopefully that was the right amount this time. Then I'm going to take my batting and just place that right on top. Oh, we do want it sitting as best we can on top. Then I'm going to smooth that out. Okay, that looks good to me. Then I'm going to take my spray again and just give it another once over. It was 2 over, wasn't it? I can't help myself. Then I'm going to take my fabric that I'd like to be the top of my Christmas stocking and place that on top and smooth it out. Now, if you don't want to use spray basting, you could just use pins if you'd like to. Now what we're going to do is quilt this, and you can quilt it however you like. I'm just going to do a cross hatch with my straight lines, which is my favorite thing to do. Now, if you wanted to, at this stage, you could print out your template and trace the shape on and only quilt where the Christmas stocking will sit. But I'm just going to quilt it like this and then do my Christmas stocking shape after I've quilted it. Quilt yours however you like. I'm just going to draw a couple of straight lines so I know where I'm going to start. Just quilt along there. Okay, now I've just got a starting point for my quilting, but remember you can quilt yours however you like. So I'm stitching at stitch length 3. I like my stitches a little bit longer when I'm doing quilting. I'm using wonderful confetti thread, and I do have my walking foot on with my special bar guide here that helps me make sure I can sew nice and evenly across from where my original stitches are. And if you haven't seen this before, I think Juki do an exceptional job of this. It's one of the things I love about the Juki is this bar guide, because it stays in place. Where you put it, it stays. It's really a bonus if you like to straight line quilt. Also, I do like to use gloves. I'm converted. They really do help even with a small project like this. So I'm just going to follow along with these lines, and I'll see you when I'm done. So I've finished quilting it, and if I just quickly show you the back, this will actually be the lining of the stocking. And then what we're going to do is make sure that it's facing us right sides up. And if it's directional fabric, make sure you're happy with the way the fabric is facing. So I've got the Christmas trees facing me. Then what we're going to do is take our backing fabric, and if it's directional, just make sure it is facing in the right direction, and we're going to face that right sides together just like that. Smooth it out, and then we're going to take our Christmas stocking template. Now you can get a free copy of this over on my website, and I'll put a link down in the description below for you. Or if you want to, you could make your own template. I suggest grabbing a Christmas stocking and just tracing around the outline of it and adding on about 1/4 of an inch around the whole border. But like I said, you can grab a free copy of this over on my website. Then what we're going to do is just pin it in place. Now I want this part of the stocking here to be straight on my print. So I will just lift it up and check. So if I fold this top fabric over and check that it is looking nice and straight on the backing and on the front of my stocking, that's looking good. Then I can also just check it on this side. And I think that looks about right for the print as well, for the trees. So that's looking really good. We want to make sure that it is fitting within our quilted piece. And that's all okay. So what I'm going to do now is just pop some pins in to keep it in place. Now what I'm going to do is just take my scissors and carefully cut around the outline of my stocking template. Now if you didn't want to double it up like this, you could cut the backing and your quilted tops individually. I just like to do it like this because once I've cut it out, I'll remove the template carefully and then just pin it back in place and sew it. So now I'm just going to remove the pins carefully, not wanting to disturb the layers underneath. Remove the template and then repin so I can sew. Now what we're going to do is sew along the very edge of our stocking, remembering to keep this opening open. So I'm using my 1/4 inch foot there. We're going to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm stitching at stitch length 2.5 and I'm starting on the very edge, and I'm going to go forward a few stitches and then do a reverse stitch. And then I'm just going to go all the way around, removing the pins as I need to. And on these curved bits, just take your time and follow the line nicely and slowly. Coming up to the very edge on this side, doing a back stitch again, and then coming forward and cutting my thread. So now we're going to take our cuff piece that measures 17.5 inches by 8 inches. We're going to fold it right sides together and sew along this edge here. So I'm going to just line up the edges on this side, across the top, and on this side. And when I'm happy it's all lined up nicely, I'm going to pop a couple of pins in. And now we'll just sew along that edge. So all the same settings, I'm not going to worry about doing a back stitch, I'm just starting on the very edge, removing the pins as I need to. Coming off the very edge and cutting my thread, and then we'll just give that a press. So now what I'm going to do is just press those seams open. So give it a finger press and press. Then I'm going to fold it in half so the wrong sides are facing each other, creating our cuff. And this part can be a little bit fiddly. So we want these edges to line up nicely. And then once we're happy that it's all sitting right, I will give it a press. And I just want to make sure that that seam is in the middle. We want that to sit on our stocking in the middle and the back. So once it's all those edges are lined up nicely, I will just give it a quick press. Mainly just for this top edge here where it's folded. Then while we're with the iron, I'm just going to take my loop. This piece measures 7 inches by 2 inches. I'm just going to fold it in half, wrong sides together, and give it a press, lining up these edges. Then what we're going to do is open it up and then take the edges and fold them into the center fold, and then press. And the same on the other side. Then what we're going to do is fold both of the sides that we just pressed down and then fold it back in half, and then I will give it one more press. And I will just pop a couple of pins in, holding it in place, and we're going to sew along the edge there, creating our loop for our Christmas stocking. So for our loop, we're just going to sew it closed, and I'm going to sew with about a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance right along that opening there, closing it up for our loop for our Christmas stocking. And I'm using my left compensating foot, which is what I like to do for these jobs, but just use whatever guide you need to get about a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Coming right off the very edge, cutting my thread. Okay, let's move on to finishing off our stocking. So now we're going to sew our cuff onto our stocking, and I find that if your directional fabric is facing in the right direction, coming down towards the raw edges, it will sit in the right direction when you've sewn it on, but do just double check. I'd hate to be telling you the wrong thing and it is wrong, so please double check that, but it seems to be working fine for me. So what we're going to do is make sure that the seam is facing the back of our stocking. So I'm just going to spin that around. So we're going to line up the raw edges of the cuff with the raw edges of the stocking. So I'm just going to fold the stocking to fit the cuff on the top there, over the top of it like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line up the edges on the back there. So I've got the raw edges lined up nicely, and when I'm happy I will just pop a couple of pins in. And then what I'm going to do is line up all the other edges, and then when I'm happy that it's sitting really nicely, I'll go around and pin it all. And now where I've got the seams, I'm going to face them so that they're going to the back of the stocking. And we just want to make sure it's sitting really nicely. It can be a little bit fiddly, and we want all those edges lined up nicely. I think this is the hardest bit, so just take your time. And now I'm coming to the front, and that looks like it's going to sit really nicely. So I'll just pin it in the front there, pop a few extra on the side. Can never have too many pins. And before we sew that, what we want to do is just grab our loop, and we want to fold it in half, and we're going to find the back of our stocking, and we want to hang it on the side where we don't have the curve, where the stocking curves. So on the back, we're going to find the back seam. And then I like to put it right next to that seam there that's from the front of the stocking, and we're just going to put it in so that the loop is facing down towards the bottom, and the raw edges again are lining up with the cuff and the edge of the stocking. I can just see my stitches are facing in towards the stocking, but I do just want them facing towards the back of the stocking. So I'm lining it up with that seam there, and then lining it up with the edge of the stocking and the cuff. And when I know that's all in place nicely, checking it's nice and straight, we can check underneath as well. I'll pop a pin in just to hold that in place as well. Okay, and now we're ready to sew around that whole edge there. Now, one thing to note is if you'd like to, you could trim and do little nicks on all the curves of the stocking just so it sits a little bit nicer. And before we attach the cuff, if you wanted to, you could use pinking shears just to tidy it up a bit, or if you had a serger, you could serge the edges as well. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to sew my cuff on now. So I'm back to my 1/4 inch foot, and I'm just going to take it really slowly. It is a little bit fiddly. We just have to be really careful now. And if you've got a free arm on your sewing machine, it's at this point you'd use that. So a free arm is when you've got a piece that comes off, and you could pop the whole opening of your Christmas stocking onto your free arm, which does make this step a lot easier. So I'm just going to slowly sew around, removing my pins as I need to, and making sure all those edges are lined up nicely. And if they aren't, this is a chance to just gently fix them. I'm just going over the loop. I am just going to do a back stitch over that so it's nice and strong. If you're enjoying this video, please do subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss out on another video. It really helps me out and I appreciate it so much. Now I'm coming back to where I started. I'm just going to go straight over the top of my stitches and do a back stitch. Cut my thread. And now let's turn it right sides out and press. So now we're going to turn it right sides out. I'm just going to pop my hand inside the stocking, grab the toe and pull it through. And then getting it sitting nicely. I'm going to use my point turner. If you don't have a point turner, you could use something like blunt, like a chopstick. And I'm just pushing all those seams so they're sitting really nicely. Okay, then we're going to fold down that cuff, and we also want that sitting nicely. And then when we feel like we've got everything sitting nicely, sorry, this is not very gracious. It's always a little bit tricky getting it all sitting nicely when we turn things right sides out. Now what I'm going to do is give it a press. So you can see now it's kind of sitting a bit funny and we can see the red popping through from the front. What I'm going to do is roll that out, and I want that sitting really nice and flat with no creases in there. And then hopefully we won't see the lining from the front, or the backing rather. And I'll do that around the whole edge of the stocking. And once I've done this, I will flip it over and do it again on the back. I just feel like when you do these details, it's just what finishes it off really nicely. Again, we don't want that all rolled in like that. We want it sitting as best we can, and then pressing. Okay, and I'll give that a quick once over on the back as well. Right, and we did have success on the cuff. My directional fabric is facing in the right direction. Do just check that before you sew it on. I'd hate for you to sew it wrong and get into a right royal pickle and have to unpick it all, but it has worked out, so I think I am right. So there's our easy Christmas stocking. That's just a beautiful, classic, simple Christmas stocking, and isn't it cute? Let me show you the back. It's just lovely. Now, I use these every year for my children, exactly this size, and they are really a great size to fit some little gifts in there for the kids. When they go to bed on Christmas Eve, I fill these up with little goodies for them, and they absolutely love them. Well, thank you so much for watching my very first compilation video. Now, if you've watched this video from the beginning to the end, wow, you're absolutely incredible. Please leave a comment and let me know that you did that and you enjoyed this video and what compilation you'd like next. Every comment that you leave, I will absolutely reply to you because I appreciate you so much. Well, have a great Christmas, and I'll see you in the next video.